Good evening, everyone, and welcome to the January 6th meeting of the Ann Arbor City Council. If you're able, please rise and join us for a moment of silence, followed by the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Would our clerk please call the roll of council?
Councilmember Hayner?
Here.
Councilmember Bannister? Here. Councilmember Griswold? Here. Councilmember Lum? Here. Councilmember Grand?
Here.
Councilmember Ackerman?
Here.
Mayor Taylor?
Here.
Councilmember Eaton?
Here.
Councilmember Nelson?
Here.
Councilmember Smith? Councilmember Rumlawi?
Here.
Motion carries.
May I have a motion, please, to approve the agenda? Moved by Councilmember Lum, seconded by Councilmember Griswold. Discussion of the agenda. All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? The agenda is approved. Do we have communications today from our city administrator?
We do. Just briefly, a couple notes for everybody. You will notice I am not Howard Lazarus. My name is John Fournier. I'm the Assistant City Administrator. Mr. Lazarus sent his regards. He is out of the state celebrating the birth of his first grandchild, so unfortunately you were all stuck with me tonight. I also want to let you know tomorrow there will be a community meeting at the Pittsfield Township Hall regarding an amendment to the PUD at the landfill for the construction of a solar power plant. That meeting will start at 7 o'clock, so please be there if you are interested. And lastly, I'd like to thank Officer Travis Keller for being here tonight to grace us with his presence and at tonight's City Council meeting. So thank you very much. Mr. Mayor.
Thank you very much. There are no introductions today, so we now come to public comment reserve time. Public comment reserve time is an opportunity for members of the public to speak to council and the community about matters of municipal interest. To speak at public comment reserve time, one needs to have signed up in advance by contacting our city clerk. Speakers have 3 minutes in which to speak, so please pay close attention to the time clock. As a matter of courtesy, we may have only one person speaking at a time. And finally, if you require assistance in speaking before council today, we'd be delighted to provide it to you. Our first speaker is Ralph McGee.
Hi, my name's Ralph McKee, 5th Ward. I sent 2 emails to you recently in the last couple of days on the short-term rental topic. I'll call that STR, which I hope you have or will read. They cover a lot of points. I'd like to focus on a couple tonight. First off, I support essentially option 3 in your consultant report, which would allow homeowners, which I'll call PRs, principal residents, to rent their spare rooms and the whole house when they're away for up to 60 days a year, but banning non-PR whole house STRs for 3 reasons. 1, the negative effect on the housing market. 2, proliferation of party houses. And 3, hurting neighborhood character. Let's focus on the housing first. All of you have agreed that we have an affordable housing crisis. It's beyond dispute that every house which turns into a non-PR whole house STR is one less house for people to rent or buy. The STR proponents that I've heard speak or write argue that we, among other things, that we don't know enough about the effect on affordable housing and therefore we shouldn't regulate yet, should analyze more data. I find that argument disingenuous and made in bad faith. The online platforms refuse to provide any meaningful data, so the argument that we should wait until we analyze that same data is a classic catch-22 and should be rejected for that reason alone. Further, many of you have often contended that adding new housing will inevitably lead to lower prices and rents. So if you remove hundreds of houses from the rental or sale market, that has to be counterproductive in a pricing context. There's no other logical way to look at it. Some STR proponents, shifting gears here, have also argued that regulation will unfairly hurt their investment in non-PR STRs. I don't think that's true. First, the underlying properties can be rented long-term or sold profitably. Does anybody know of any Ann Arbor houses that went down in value over the last 5 years? And also, several cities have banned them in the last few years, so investors knew or should have known before buying the properties of the risk of regulation. That's been out there for a long time. And I think that the reason that the proponents of such STRs are arguing so strongly against a ban of them is that they have an unfair competitive advantage, non-level playing field, since they're not paying hotel occupancy taxes while in effect running a hotel. Finally, the argument that I've heard also that non-PR STRs are necessary to provide housing for specific needs for hospital patients or academic visitors, that's a weak argument. Under this proposal, option 3, there would be plenty of homeowner rental and spare STR rooms available. Thank you.
Thank you. Our next speaker is Noah Hoffman.
Thank you. I'm a resident of Ann Arbor, and I'm a short-term rental host, and I've been doing so for about 2 years. I've been following all available guidelines and regulations to offer our guests a terrific experience. But most importantly, I've gone above and beyond to be a great neighbor. I have invested to do this legally, and I'm here today because the proposed legislation, as defined in the Carlisle-Wortman memo, specifically option 3, threatens to cause severe economic stress to all involved, not just us hosts, but our guests, and a broad network of cleaners and handymen, restaurants, and vendors in Ann Arbor. Now, this discussion began with a discussion about neighborhood safety. There were several other issues communicated by stakeholders, and I agree. Those issues need to be thought about. But as we think about addressing any issues, my understanding of the legislative process is that the stakeholders' concerns are voiced, problems are identified, solutions are proposed, and ultimately laws are adopted. After holding 3 public meetings and opening up the proposed resolution for public comment online, it has been resoundingly voiced that less regulation, not more, is what is warranted here. It's been voiced repeatedly by residents that the right data has not been used to come to any conclusions on what the issues actually are. Of the 60 comments that were made to oppose or support this resolution online, only 1 has been in support, while 59 have opposed. The bottom line is we should put ordinances in place that accomplish what is in the best interest of the vast majority of people, based on the data and the opinions voiced. Only recently, and very discreetly, the city administrator has apparently decided that short-term rentals fall into a commercial category that they feel has precedent based on certain case law in Michigan. But the use for and interpretation of zoning codes should be based on what the folks who live in the areas in question actually want. And it is overwhelmingly clear that the interpretation of the short-term rental as a commercial business goes against the will of the community. And as you as city council members have a duty to represent us, we ask that you direct the city administrator to draft legislation based on option 1 in the Carlisle-Wortman memo, based on the opinions of the community. As a final thought, permits and accountability will make this city safer. Permits will provide crucial data for the city, accountability for those who rent on a short-term basis, and a direct process for penalizing negligent hosts, as you would any neighbor or landlord. I think we've all learned a lot from this discussion, and I know there's been a lot of talk, and I really look forward to seeing a common sense resolution adopted. Thank you for your time.
Thank you very much. Our next speaker is Carol Scala.
I apologize, I have to read this from my phone. Don't have a paper copy. At an informal meeting yesterday with council members, a well-respected citizen, non-owner, commented that the recommendations in the Carlisle report were nothing short of draconian. I agree. The report is a refusal to accept that our cities are dynamic, evolving, and ever-changing, and the travel world is no different. Our neighborhoods are changing too, constantly. If Ann Arbor wants to continue to present itself to the world as progressive, inclusive, diverse, and a great place to visit, homestays need to be a part of the housing landscape. The need is even greater considering that we are one of the greatest medical care cities in the world. STRs are not a blight on this city, and the current impact is insignificant except for the fact that some people just don't like them and don't want them here. It's insulting to insinuate that my completely renovated home is a blight on my street, but the house 4 doors down from me that is overgrown to the point of oblivion and occupied by a hoarder is not. What is being done about these truly blighted properties? STRs represent a minuscule percentage of family homes in this city. STR owners want to work with council to craft policies that are reasonable and fair. Many cities have successfully done this, and Ann Arbor has the opportunity to be a bellwether city in this effort, not by indiscriminately slamming the door on current rentals, but by finding creative solutions that work for everyone. At caucus yesterday, it was mentioned that non-owner occupied STRs are going to be proposed to council tonight as a violation of the residential zoning ordinance, and that for this reason alone, they should be banned because they are a business operating in a residential zone. How in the world would council propose banning all businesses currently being run out of single-family homes in this city? There are thousands of them. You can't discriminate these service businesses against STRs. If they are transacting business, making money, they are a business. Any of these professionals have comings and goings in the course of business, and all of them are expected to comply with nuisance ordinances like trash, noise, and parking in their neighborhoods. STRs are no different. This entire process has been a rush to judgment. Please move to table this recommendation for further study with reliable and unbiased data, and hopefully draft an ordinance that would allow for at least a grandfathering of the existing STRs or a cap on STR registrations to be fair and equitable to both sides involved. And my final question to council is this: if you use, each and every one of you, STRs in your travels, and I know that some of you do, is this not a clear example of not in my backyard?
Thank you. Our next speaker is Shannon Hatakami.
Hatamaki. My name is Shannon Hatamaki. I live in Lower Burns Park. I'd like to encourage council to pass this consent agenda item to begin the work of regulating short-term rentals. So in July, I was sexually assaulted on the sidewalk of Rose Avenue by a man while I was walking to Rose White Park in my neighborhood. The house the man was staying in, also on Rose Avenue, is being used exclusively for short-term rentals. The owners of this house have not expressed any remorse for what has happened. They live in France full-time, so they don't know me, don't know our neighborhood, and they don't feel bad about their tenants causing harm to the neighbors. After all, they're not here to see the pain, anxiety, and real fear it caused. But I really don't want to talk about these individuals anymore. I think everyone on council is aware of the risk we take when we allow what are essentially unregulated hotels to be run in residential neighborhoods. I do want to tell you about the neighborhood that I really love. My husband and I were very fortunate to buy a house in Lobupa 6 years ago and start a family. We have 2 boys now, a 4-year-old and a 2-year-old. We have 1 car, so the kids and I ride the bus off into the library, hands-on museum, preschool center for first step classes. We're regulars at Argus Farm Stop on Packard, Ruzo's Coffee off South Industrial. We buy pre-loved clothes at Salvation Army, dinners from Benny's Restaurant, groceries from Lucky's Market, Produce Station, and By the Pound. I think I got everybody. We nearly always walk or bike to all these places. This fall, my oldest will attend Burns Park Elementary, where we will walk or bike to school every day. As our children get older and more capable, the need for another car in my family will become even less. I love this car-light lifestyle my neighborhood allows, but I see it becoming much harder for others to obtain because of these investment properties used exclusively for short-term rentals. There are out-of-state investors targeting my neighborhood specifically for our close proximity to Michigan Stadium. But the tourists are not here now in the dead of winter. These houses are sitting empty, displacing people who already work in Ann Arbor and would love to live in our neighborhood, people who I want as neighbors, frankly. I think it's important to fully use all the housing we have in the city, in our downtown adjacent neighborhoods especially, if we want to even hope to make a difference in reducing our collective carbon footprint. I think a ban on investment properties used for short-term rentals is wholly appropriate. These are the most problematic of any of the short-term rentals because they are not accountable to their neighbors. They don't have to see them every day. as well as the only ones that contribute to our current housing crisis. I'm not trying to completely get rid of STRs or deny the benefits they provide to some visitors and even owners. I just want to make sure we don't have our neighborhoods being decimated by vacation rentals where no one lives there during the winter. The current regulations or lack thereof are clearly not doing enough to protect neighborhoods now. Thank you.
Thank you. Our next speaker is Kathy Stroud. My apologies. Thank you. My next speaker is Carol.
Actually, my name is Kathy.
Oh, goodness. Well, is it you?
Sorry?
The
Yes, my name is Kathy Strachan.
floor is yours. Thank you.
I was here last night at caucus to ask for objective data supporting the claims that STRs have more nuisance issues and affect availability and affordability of housing in Ann Arbor, as option 3 was presented as the course to address those issues. At caucus, Councilman Ali shared a discussion he had with staff, and it was really the zoning ordinance that is central to the ban on non-owner occupied STRs. Wow, this is quite a bait and switch. When the smokescreen of nuisance and affordability was challenged on the basis of data and facts, a new reason was presented. When the proposal for 616 Washington, the tallest building to be built in Ann Arbor in 50 years, was brought before council, many members felt it was not fair to impose new rules after the fact. These short-term owners have followed the rules by registering their properties, getting inspected, obtaining certificate of occupancies, and with no problem. The zoning ordinance was never brought up as an issue. What changed? Like, what happened? What is the reason that short-term rentals are now under attack? What is the hidden backstory here? We feel that we have been misled and that someone has an agenda out to ban STRs. The community website, as someone's mentioned, has 60 comments on it, only one opposing the resolution and creating this regulation according to option 3. Banning STRs is not the will of the people from the community meetings that I attended, and it has not been expressed on the community website. The reasons for opposing are varied and clearly articulated. In April of 2019, MLive reported that residential lots were rezoned along Hoover and Davis Avenues, west of Maine, from multiple family to single family. The outcome was properties that have operated as multiple family rentals can continue in the same manner under the single family zoning as they were grandfathered in, according to Brett Lenart, the city planning manager. And this action should be applied here, grandfathering in the existing STRs where they currently exist. Now, from my own perspective as a homeowner, I live in Ward 1, if I want to rent out my primary residence for a few days or a sporadic week here or there, I should not have to have my home inspected. That is invasive. It sends a message to a guest that would be staying at my house that they need to be protected from an unsafe house that I am currently living in. And I ask that you support option 1 for the short-term rental regulation. Thank you.
Thank you. Our next speaker is Kathy Stroud.
Good evening. I was here last night, and it's the first caucus I've ever attended for City Council. By the way, I live at 2271 Placid Way, Ann Arbor, Michigan. It's 111, a new precinct, which used to be 19. Okay, I was here last night. There were 4 of you here. It was a great discussion. I mean, we were here for 2 hours, and at least over an hour was on this issue. And I met some wonderful people who are here tonight who are not on my. They don't think exactly the way I think, but we're not on opposite places. We all are for you passing the direction tonight that you look into regulations, or that you instruct your staff to look into regulations, whether it's option 1, option 2, option 3, or option 4, or something else. those of us that have been in government for many years, I was on the County Board of Commissioners from 1972 to 1980. We understand zoning law, and we understand that the people in Ann Arbor have spoken. The people in Ann Arbor have said, we want a regulated community. We don't want gas stations next to our houses. We don't want university housing in our residential areas. We want a zoning law that says only 4 unrelated people may live in a home. For all kinds of reasons, this needs to pass tonight, and the details are going to be worked out later. So please pass the instructing staff to go ahead with this. Thank you.
Thank you. Our next speaker is Mojan Savabiasfani.
Hello, Ann Arbor. I have spoken here against the plan to put Gelman contamination site on a Superfund list, and I have given you the reasons why. It takes up to 30 years for sites that are already on the EPA list to be cleaned up. If we want to go that route, it's basically just for being forced to wait for a very long time if it comes to be cleaned. I know that Council Member Hayner in last October told us that the more he learns about this situation, the more he realizes that we might have to clean up this contamination ourselves. I want to invite him to please elaborate on that. What has he learned that has brought him to this conclusion? And we will know better. From my side, I know, having worked on EPA sites that are contaminated, I know even if the site is on the list of Superfund site, it will take decades before the EPA gets around to doing it. At this stage, when EPA is basically an organization that supports polluters, I very much doubt that this would be a way to go with. It will make you look like you are busy, but you are not going the right way. Since the United States government, a few days ago, assassinated an Iranian general who has been the savior of the entire region by defeating ISIS, and I am originally from Iran, I feel that I need to make a statement here. United States government just assassinated a man that was loved across the Middle East for his efforts and success in removing ISIS from the area. ISIS was promoted and armed by the United States. The reason why people love him is because he protected their children from being raped by ISIS. They protected people from being decapitated by ISIS. This man was loved, and the United States assassinated him illegally. This is a crime. The reason why I talk about it here today is because the racism that allowed this criminal act to happen starts right here in these chambers. Every time you stand against measures to protect lives of Arabs, you are saying it is okay to kill Arabs. It is okay to kill Iranians. Every time you say nothing about Israel and murder of Palestinians, Arabs, every time you say nothing about it and keep your mouth shut, you are allowing a racism that in the long run and in the big picture murders and assassinates Arabs, Iranians. You've had many, many chances throughout many, many years to speak up against Israel. I ask you to do it.
Thank you.
Boycott Israel. At least cut off the military aid to them.
Thank you. Our next speaker is David Hallman.
Thank you. Thank you, everybody.
Good evening. I'm David Hallman. I want to thank Mr. Mayor and the council members and the staff for allowing me to speak this evening. And I do want to make sure that everybody understands the officer that walked in with me, we just shared an elevator. He did not bring me to the meeting. I'm asking that consent agenda item number 1 be removed from the consent agenda and looked at as an individual item. We have a claim with the city on sewer backup that was obviously, the recommendation is to turn us down. We've been through the whole story, what happened, why it happened. It's not an easy case. What I've gotten is 2 letters from your senior claims adjuster, who you contract for, because you're self-insured, so you don't have an adjuster on the city payroll. And that person wrote 1 letter saying it's rejected. The folks that were here at the caucus last night got copies of the letters. So if you don't have one, you don't have the whole story. But, basically what she says here is the city's decision is based on a number of reasons, not the least of which is the immunity that the state of Michigan grants the city by statute. So basically what we're saying here is we're immune. If we don't want to pay it, we don't pay it. Whether we deserve to, or whether we were wrong, or whether there's a question of liability, the state of Michigan holds us harmless. And so you understand, Lori O'Malley, who signed the letters, as your adjuster, has never been to our home. She's never come out. She's never been in the neighborhood. I think she knows how to find from Toledo to the meeting site here for the commission meetings. That's it. Some people have said to me, but the commission's recommending that it be turned down. And I guess that's fine. But you have a planning commission. Do you approve every recommendation the planning commission sent you? I think not. All I'm asking here is that you remember that Ann Arbor is a community of residents and people. And we are residents, have been residents. We've been paying taxes on that property for over 25 years. And all we're asking for is a fair shake, to be treated like a fellow resident of the city. Thank you.
Thank you. Our next speaker is Lauren Tatarski.
Hi all, good to see you again. My name is Lauren Tatarski. I'm a former police task force member, and I'm here tonight to address the proposal to add $100,000 to the police budget for a new officer. This proposal is presented in a way that seems to makes it appear like a new officer is something that the ICPOC has asked for or would be beneficial to the commissioners, but actually that's not the case for the following reasons. 1, currently it's a rule that the state police offer training to those who can have access to reports. So Michigan State Police should edit that rule to allow some commissioners, those who choose to do so based on the fact that there's a background check involved, to take the lean training and access unredacted reports and complaints themselves. It is simply counterproductive and antithetical to civilian oversight to not allow full information to be given to the ICPOC. 2, if access to reports lies within the police's jurisdiction, they will redact reports before sharing them with the ICPOC, which takes out critical information necessary for the commissioners to have adequate context to do their job. Number 3, this new hire would also serve to expand AAPD's attempts at community policing, and I'd like to now share how community policing is problematic. The following words are all taken from Philip Harris, who is a PhD candidate at Yale University. On the surface, community policing sounds like an ideal way to reform policing, but police violence towards Black people has persisted. A study published by the Journal of Experimental Criminology examining the strategy around the country suggests that community policing does not significantly reduce crime or make communities safer. The strategy further floods communities with police and legitimizes an institution that is centered on punishment and control. Police appear more as an occupying force, extra surveillance of the residents as opposed to protecting. As long as poverty and racial inequality exist, policing will always expose Black people and other marginalized communities to higher rates of surveillance, arrest, and violence. Community policing creates the false idea that police can solve structural issues through building partnership, but policing has only made these issues worse. Police do not speak to the wide range of concerns around safety that residents have, nor should they try to. Marginalized communities need resources to thrive. Investing in community policing or policing more broadly will not change underlying structural context that leads to a lack of safety, nor will it change the laws that criminalize people for being poor and disadvantaged. The solution? Divert funds for additional police personnel towards community-based safety and wellness initiatives, such as arts and athletic programs, violence interruption, quality schools, having trained and well-resourced rapid response teams that can address a wide range of emergencies without police presence. So I suggest that you take that $100,000 and channel that into community resources. Thank you.
Thank you. Our next speaker is Henry Herskovitz.
Good evening. I would like to explain to Council why our group selected Beth Israel Congregation as the appropriate venue for protests against the Jewish state. 16 years ago, we wrote, "We hold vigils outside this synagogue because Beth Israel is a political institution as well as a house of worship, using its faith to promote a nationalist agenda." Then in 2007, Rabbi Doberson confirmed that the entire congregation supported Israel's claimed right to exist as a Jewish state, and we oppose that claim to a right to ethnically cleanse Palestine of its non-Jewish inhabitants. We noted that Beth Israel flies a foreign flag in its sanctuary, that the congregation recites a prayer for the state of Israel every week, that many congregants wave Israeli flags as they drive into the parking lot, and that some even sport Jewish Israeli license plates. We then recognized the great insight into racial differences by Malcolm X. He said to white activists, "The Negroes aren't the racists. Where the really sincere white people have got to do the proving of themselves is not among the black victims, but out there on the battle lines where America's racism really is, and that's in their own home communities." Let's rephrase that. The Palestinians aren't the racists. Where the really sincere Jewish people have got to do their proving of themselves is not among Palestinian victims, but out there on the battle lines of where Israel's racism really is, and that's in their own Jewish communities. The synagogue is the core of the Jewish community. Beth Israel is certainly no exception. The Jewish chauvinism formed there is reflected in Jewish holidays, where Jews are portrayed as victims of an alleged hostile world. An unhealthy, toxic paradigm of us versus them is thus formed. It is a paradigm which is the opposite of the universalism expressed in Christianity. The Jewish community self-isolates from the others. Consider some signs in front of local churches. Bethlehem Church says, "God's doors are open to all." First Congregational says, "All are welcome." First Baptist says, "Open to all, closed to none." But sadly, not so at Beth Israel. Its support of a self-isolated state, Jewish state, makes it the legitimate venue for protest. Thank you.
Are there communications from council? Councilmember Griswold.
I have three things, and first I want to ask a question, and one of the reasons that I'm asking this is because of the Open Meetings Act, we really can't get together and discuss housekeeping type issues as a group, and that is communications. When an email comes into the mayor and all of council, could someone at a future meeting explain exactly what the response is for that? And is there a standard response? So that's my question, because as a new council member, I really don't know. And for the public, we get sometimes 50 emails in a day. So some of the more generic ones, I'm assuming that a staff member is replying to those, but I want to ensure that. Also, regarding communications, I want to thank Councilmember Nelson for her newsletter and for her voting chart. Last week, I had a number of people approach me and ask me, when's it going to be out? So that tells me that it's very valuable, so thank you. Number 2 is really short. It's about streetlights. I hope we focus on streetlights this year, especially at crosswalks. I've been to a number of meetings lately, and people, I don't know if they recognize me, and that's why they start talking about the need for streetlights, or if there just is a legitimate need. But that's good. The last thing is, I just want to thank everyone in the audience for coming. Sometimes it's a bit uncomfortable, but what you have to realize is that we are making tremendous progress as a council. And as a result of that, we're accelerating that process, and there's going to be more tension. And I believe that is a good thing. And I also want to thank everyone who submitted analyses regarding short-term rentals. I was really impressed by the professional nature of those reports, regardless of the position that people took. They supported their positions with data. They were very thoughtful, and for that, thank you.
Councilmember Omlawi.
Well, thank you. It's been a few weeks, so just wanted to welcome everyone back and wish everyone a happy new year. Hopefully we have a great start to the new year and get lots of things done before our big election later this year. I also would like to congratulate our city administrator, give him the best wishes to his and his family, to him and his family on becoming a grandpa. I heard that's the whole purpose of having kids, so is to have grandkids. So I just wanted to congratulate him and his family.
Councilmember Hayner.
Thank you. A couple announcements on water issues. Tomorrow's the first card meeting of the year, January 7th from 6 to 8 p.m. out at Washtenaw. That's the Coalition for Action on the remediation of dioxin. And to elaborate, as one of the speakers said earlier, one of the reasons I'm concerned that is that if you go to these card meetings and you see the data that's been collected over these 30-some years, you see that we've been a long time without any real progress on this. The three intervening parties together spend about $900 a day, 365 days a year on legal help, with nothing to show for it, really nothing. And the charts and the data show that this just keeps continuing to spread. And so I came to the conclusion, the unfortunate conclusion, that something needs to be done, and we may have to take matters into our own hands, and it may be sooner rather than later. We'll see how it keeps going. It's not going well. The following Tuesday, January 14th, from 5 to 8 p.m. At the Washtenaw Community College Morris Lawrence Building, the MPART, which is a Michigan PFAS Action Response Team formed by the state of Michigan, is going to be taking citizen comments on PFAS rules. And we're talking about, the state is talking about creating its own drinking water criteria for PFAS. And of course, we all know that the CEC, as it does with dioxin, would probably agree with and say the same thing with PFAS, and that 0 is the right amount to have in your drinking water. Unfortunately, in our state and with our shared state waters, that's not possible, unfortunately. And so they're asking to set a standard that can be enforced, and I think that's important. So anybody's welcome to do their public comments at that time. Hello to the deer call people who are here. I'm sorry I've been unable to restrict this barbaric practice. I'm doing what I can. I actually asked to observe the practice, and I was offered instead to meet with our vendor, euphemistically called vendor, on this process, which doesn't really give me any confidence that we have real oversight of this issue. So I'm concerned about that, and I wanted to share my concerns with the folks here in the room. One last thing. Well, two last things. I agree with Councilwoman Griswold about our need for street lighting and other concerns about public safety in these our shared transit corridors. And over the holidays, I had the opportunity to observe behavior of both bikes, pedestrians, and cars at length as I scooted around town in my various modes. And I've seen some abhorrent behavior by all three of those vehicle modes. We saw herds of pedestrians crossing against the light. All over the holidays. I don't know if drinking played a part in that. It might have. I've seen many cars going down the William Street bike lane. There's a lot of confusion around William and Ashley and First of what's going on there. So a lot of cars turning off of Main Street right down the bike lane. And so I'm not sure that has improved behavior. And I also had an unfortunate experience where clearly a bike hound type person, a full gear person with the thing on his head, the camera and everything, blew the red light on Catherine as we were going on Fifth, southbound, and when I asked my passenger to roll his window down so I could give him a friendly share of the road, instead we were given a string of expletives and hand gestures from the cyclist as if it was my fault for going through the green light. And so, you know, I question this notion of sharing the road. If we're going to share the road, then you share the rules. And that's the same for pedestrians and bikes and cars, and I just want to hang that out there. And last, I'm sorry about our warmongering and profiteering with Iran. I think that's a terrible thing that happened. And I just want to send a shout out to my wife who's in Rwanda right now in Africa inspecting organic tea plantations. And I wish her well in getting home. Thank you.
Further communication from council. Councilor McGrann.
Thank you. Wish everyone a Happy New Year and thank everyone for coming out tonight. It's great to start off our year with so much participation. I want to encourage people in the community, I don't think it's too late because it started just today, to think about joining the 21-day equity challenge from the United Way of Washtenaw County and lots of other partner organizations. You can find information about that on the United Way of Washtenaw County's website, a number of other partner organization websites, and there are flyers downstairs at our welcome desk if you are interested in getting some more information about that. I think it's a terrific way to start off the new year with some quality and community reflection. And also want to thank the Ann Arbor Police Department and Chief Cox. I had the pleasure of joining members of my religious community to celebrate Hanukkah in December, and we were joined by many members of the Ann Arbor Police Department, which I know at Liberty Plaza, which enabled everyone to celebrate safely and share in some of our customs and letting some light into the season. So thank you.
Councilmember Ackerman.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I hesitated whether or not to say anything in response to Mr. Herskovitz's comments. Mr. Herskowitz was the last person to speak to City Council, and I think it's important that I make a comment in response, not only because Beth Israel as a congregation sits within the 3rd Ward, and I represent the 500 residents and members of the congregation, but also because I grew up in the congregation. I had my bar mitzvah there. I went to Hebrew school there. My parents were members of the congregation for over a decade. Anti-Semitism in modern America isn't using the word kike or drawing caricatures of bankers with big noses. Anti-Semitism in modern America looks exactly like Mr. Herskowitz. Anti-Semitism in modern America looks like embedding distrust in your neighbors. I'm not accusing you of anything. I'm accusing Mr. Herskowitz of being an anti-Semite and using his platform as protesting a house of worship for the last 16 years as racist and anti-Semitic. And I think it's important to call out what anti-Semitism in America looks like today is embedding distrust in your neighbors. It says calling into question our loyalty as Americans and also members of the Jewish faith. It means calling into question the amount of people who died in the Holocaust, to question the legitimacy of any claims over anything. It means using. It means
This is a Holocaust.
it means
This is a Holocaust.
it means using the word Jewish or Jew no more or no less than 15 times in your comments to City Council, while drawing comparisons of the Jewish faith to the Christian faith and the superiority of the Christian faith. Anti-Semitism exists in our community. It looks like Mr. Herskowitz. And any time that he comes up to speak while I'm still in office, I'll make sure that everyone in the room knows exactly who he is and what he stands for.
You brought the K word into this council. You brought the dirty K word into this council. Only you did that. Further communication from council. We have before us the consent agenda. May I have a motion, please, to approve the consent agenda? Moved by Councilmember Griswold, second by Councilmember Lum. Discussion of the consent agenda. Councilmember Ramlawi.
If I could pull a couple things. I'd like to pull out CA 1 and CA 11.
Thank you.
I'm sure there's going to be others.
Councilmember Lum.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Yeah, I agree. We have several important items on the consent agenda tonight, and I believe we should discuss them publicly. So I'd like to pull out also CA 6, CA 7, CA 17, CA 18, and CA 20.
Further discussion of the consent agenda? Councilmember Griswold.
I'd like to pull CA 19.
Further discussion of the consent agenda? Councilmember Hayner.
Just discussion through 12, 13, 14, and 15 are all related to our mental health court and our other facilities here in the community that we support these social goods in our community. And I wish that they weren't 8-vote situations out of the budget cycle. These kinds of things should be in the budget cycle, and I think we're out of sync a little with the court's request for these. But I especially encourage my colleagues to support CA 15, which is a safe house, and they do a remarkable amount of good work out there with a remarkably small amount of money from the city. And so I'm, even though it's sort of a county, county-based thing, it's not actually in the city proper. I think they do an amazing job out there, and I really encourage us to support Safe House now and in the future. Thank you.
Further discussion of the consent agenda? All in favor of the consent agenda with the exception of CA 1, 6, 7, 11, 17, 18, 19, and 20. All say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? The consent agenda with the exception of CA 1, 6, 7, 11, 17, 18, 19, and 20 is approved, thus satisfying the 8-vote requirement. With respect to CA 12, CA 13, CA 15, and CA 14, thank you. CA 1, resolution to approve November 21, 2019 recommendation of the Board of Insurance Administration, moved by Councilmember Ramlawi, seconded by Councilmember Hayner. Discussion, please, of CA 1. Councilmember Ramlawi.
Thank you. I'm just representing my constituent here, and I appreciate staff's time and effort in getting documents that have been requested regarding this claim. My concern was that it was just reported to me that some of the information that was released later to me and then given to my constituent was not a part of the initial review of the claim. And I was just wondering if there's any light that can be given, and I apologize perhaps for not putting this in the agenda questions, with this claim, if there's any information that can be shared. If not, I understand at this point. But I just wanted to bring it up. It was been asked to be pulled and perhaps discussed. You know, I just, going back, this has been going on for several months, and I know we need to deny this or approve this for it to be denied in order for the appeals to go forward, but we are running against the clock with the weather and construction and the repairs that need to be done, and I'm just wondering whether there was anything that could have happened in a different way where we could have had a resolution brought sooner than currently is the case.
Councilor Lum?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I serve on the Board of Insurance with Councilmember Nelson, and I will just share that the Board of Insurance provided Mr. Holman the opportunity to have technically 2 appeals of this matter. We discussed it at length, and Mr. Pettigrew, the city treasurer, who presides over these deliberations, is not here this evening, and I apologize. I did not know that this would be, removed from the agenda, and so he really had no heads up in that regard. again, I apologize for that, but I would like to suggest that we, so that the information can be provided you, the additional background information of the reviews that went into this recommendation, and in order for Mr. Pettigrew to be here to field any questions that you may have and others may have, I would like to suggest that we postpone this to the next council meeting.
May I have a second? Second by Councilmember Smith. Discussion of postponement. Councilmember Bannister.
Well, and I just wanted to weigh in and perhaps ask John Fournier for further explanation. We have had at least one other situation that I know of where a contractor washes their concrete debris into the storm drain that subsequently causes a sewer backup and overflow.
To that, I will just say we did discuss that aspect of this claim, and there was no related cause and effect with what you just described and this backup that resulted. And again, Mr. Pettigrew could attend and provide you further information and can also in the interim. So I do think postponing it would be helpful. But we did, this was discussed, addressed, investigated by the city staff, and so there's more information that we could provide you to help clarify this recommendation.
Councilmember Hayner to the postponement.
Yeah, thank you. And I'll support a postponement, especially because I'd be interested in seeing that information. And also, my question about the postponement is, does postponing this for 2 weeks in any way affect any kind of timeline for appeal or any other such matters?
He's already had 2 appeals.
Is there an appeal ahead over the city, or is his claim solely with the city?
Mr. Postman.
Yeah.
You know, I don't have all the background in front of me.
It's a small claim against, right,
Solely a city claim.
it's a city claim. No, he's had 2 appeals.
Well, I'll support a delay.
All in favor of the postponement?
Aye.
All opposed? It's postponed to our next meeting. CA 11, resolution to approve the purchase of a vehicle from Fontaine Chrysler Dodge, Michigan bid in the amount of $39,772. Moved by Councilmember Ramlawi, seconded by Councilmember Smith. Discussion, please, of CA 11. Councilmember Ramlawi.
Thank you. I will be pulling these type of consent agenda spending requests when they pertain to the mental health county millage. This is something that continues to bother me. It'll continue to bother me until we address it. In this case, we're going to be using $21,000 of the county health millage to pay for something that ought to be paid for with the fleet's funds. Even though we're upgrading and replacing all our vehicles to meet our climate action goals and our climate emergency goals, those costs need to be realized by the actual departments that are incurring those costs, and quit, in my opinion, abusing the county health millage to pay for, in this case, a car and a charging station that would otherwise be paid for with a regular operating revenue and expenses, and in this case, it would be paid for by the fleet fund completely. So I'm going to keep calling this out. I'm going to keep urging my colleagues to join me and to churn this thing around, and so we can spend that money in ways that was better intended to be spent.
Further discussion? Roll call vote, please, starting with Councilmember Smith. I'm sorry.
That's all right.
Jeff?
That's
Pardon
okay.
me.
I'll talk to you later, Councilman Ramwali. I agree. Yeah.
Thank you. Further discussion? Roll call vote, please, starting with Councilmember Smith.
Councilmember Smith?
Yes.
Councilmember Ramlawi?
No.
Councilmember Hayner?
No.
Councilmember Bannister?
No.
Councilmember Griswold?
No.
Councilmember Lum?
Yes.
Councilmember Grand?
Yes.
Councilmember Ackerman?
Yes.
Mayor Taylor?
Yes.
Councilmember Eaton?
No.
Councilmember Nelson?
Yes.
Motion carries.
CA6, resolution to approve a grant application to the USDA Agricultural Conservation Easement Program for purchase of a conservation easement on property in Salem Township. Moved by Councilor Lum, seconded by Councilmember Grand. Discussion of CA6, Councilor Lum.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. CA6 is to apply for a federal grant to purchase a conservation easement in Salem Township. It's important because it's 375 acres, which would represent the largest greenbelt transaction we've ever had. The price tag will be a big one, in the $3.5 million range, which makes it all the more critical that city taxpayer greenbelt dollars are very well leveraged. The first step in leveraging is trying to secure a federal grant, and that's what this resolution does, so I'll be supporting it. A federal grant alone, however, will not provide the necessary leverage I believe Ann Arbor taxpayers deserve. So it will be very important to also secure funding from the county, from Salem Township, and perhaps others. The cover memo indicates the city, quote, will seek funding contributions from Washtenaw County, Salem Township, local land conservation entities, and other relevant stakeholders, end quote. That's certainly appropriate, and hopefully there will be several other contributors, and the contributions will be substantial. If not, I'll likely not support the conservation purchase easement when it comes back to council, which is expected in September. It's not just the magnitude that makes this purchase unique, however. A portion of this property, 80 acres or about 20%, lies outside the greenbelt boundary, and that's very concerning to me. Purchasing property outside the boundary is a slippery slope, especially considering we've already expanded the boundary twice, in 2007 and in 2011, beyond what was originally approved by voters back in 2003. At some point, as we move further and further away from Ann Arbor, there are diminishing returns for folks paying the bills, Ann Arbor taxpayers. Different people will have different views on whether we've hit that point already. But in any case, council needs to carefully consider how far from the city limits we'll go to protect property. So with this one, there's strategic considerations beyond just the basic obligation to leverage Ann Arbor tax dollars. We'll be having conversations soon about the Greenbelt strategic plan, and that's appropriate. In the meantime, I'll support this resolution tonight to apply for federal grant funds because that's the necessary first step. Thank you.
Further further discussion? All in favor? Aye. Opposed? It is approved. CA7, resolution to accept the revised revised solid waste resourceage plan. Moved by Councilmember Lum, seconded by Councilor Ackerman. Discussion, please, of CA7. Councilmember Lum.
Thank you again, Mr. Mayor. This solid waste resource management plan is one of the most important studies we've undertaken. It was very well done, comprehensive and objective, and the recommendations well thought out and data-driven. My thanks again to city staff and to APTIM. As evidenced by the study itself and the potential cost savings identified, it's clear that the processes we have now for solid waste, recycling, and composting are not efficient or particularly effective. For whatever reasons, we've evolved to a point where we have a hodgepodge of service providers doing different aspects of collection. And for me, the single most important takeaway from the study is that there are substantial opportunities for cost saving to taxpayers through collection consolidation. It's never pleasant to discover that what we've been doing isn't particularly efficient. But the good news is that the potential consolidation savings are really significant, over $2 million a year, and those savings can fund the new services we'd like year-round composting, and improvements necessary, like weekend service downtown. I fully support the recommendations of the plan and enthusiastically support this resolution tonight. It's not often we have the opportunity to take actions that can result in such financial benefits to our taxpayers. Again, the study identifies potential savings of over $2 million annually. $1.3 million from consolidation of commercial collection activities and $775,000 from consolidation of residential collection services. Obviously, we need to go through the competitive bidding processes before we know what the actual savings will be, but the potential is huge. I just hope that when decision time comes, City Council will be persuaded by the financials and service quality, rather than by a blind allegiance to a particular vendor. If history is any indication, however, council will choose to source business to recycle Ann Arbor, regardless of cost or quality considerations. We like them, they're our friends. Anyway, we'll have to see what happens, but we do appear to have an opportunity to improve service quality overall and save a significant amount of taxpayer dollars by implementing this solid waste resource management plan, and that's exciting. Thank you.
Further discussion? Councilor Eaton.
This is one of those rare occasions when I disagree with my colleague, Councilmember Lum. I believe that this solid waste plan is lacking in some very fundamental ways, and I'm disappointed that we spent the amount of money that we did and the amount of time that we did on this plan and came up with a document that really speculates as to savings as opposed to identifying real and identifiable savings. I'm especially disturbed that we have a 5-year plan in front of us that really doesn't make any recommendations as to how we get to or proceed towards zero waste, which has been a long-term goal of ours, and yet we're not even discussing it at this point in time. Instead, this plan parses out small, particular activities such as fixing the long-term downtown trash collection pickup problems, and rather than being a planning document, it's really just a list of to-do items that we could do without a plan, actually. We could have solved our MRF problem some time ago. We could have addressed the downtown trash pickup problem some time ago. And instead, we waited for this, and this really falls short in a variety of ways. This morning, we received a memorandum, a joint statement from the Huron Valley group of the Sierra Club, the Interfaith Council for Peace and Justice, the Huron Valley Area Labor Federation, the Ecology Center, Ann Arbor Area Elders for Climate Action, and a retired solid waste employee from the city of Ann Arbor, making some recommendations, and I believe that these recommendations are pertinent. And so I would like to move that we refer this plan back to back to staff to actually address the issues raised in that memorandum and seek an improved plan. If we're going to have a 5-year plan, it should actually have some greater vision within its recommendations. So I'm moving to.
Perhaps can I suggest that be a motion to table and that staff take that recommendation?
Okay. I have no objection to tabling it.
All right, thank you. Is there a second on that? Second by Councilmember Smith. Discussion on the motion to table? I'm sorry, Councilmember Lum? Thank you. Councilmember Ackerman.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. But before we take a vote to table, I want to thank staff for their work on this. This is a look at data that we haven't looked at comprehensively in my tenure here, and done so in a professional and expert manner, which I think is greatly appreciated by everyone. I think there's still some heartburn from members of the environmental and labor communities that we would love to work through with you, but want to extend thanks before this vote.
Further discussion? Councilor Hayner?
Well, I think that setting this aside might be appropriate if we understand that we have to kind of hustle on the backside here to let staff know what it is we're looking for. I agree with Councilmember Eaton's concerns about the solid waste plan somewhat neglecting zero waste or sort of passing off zero waste back to our city's solid waste resources plan. But our city's solid waste resources plan says that we seek to maximize materials composted, recycled, or reused while minimizing over amount of landfill trash. Well, it's not zero waste. That means the waste disappears from your curb and you don't know where it goes. Zero waste is you don't generate any waste, or you generate as little waste as possible. And what waste has to be generated is then dealt with in an ecologically appropriate manner. And I don't see that spelled out here, and so I'm happy to table this and send this back for review. For that reason alone, I'm not beholden to any special interests, or I don't have any predisposition as who should be taking our trash and recycling away. I really want the best deal for the community and the environment in keeping with our climate action goals, so I will happily support tabling this, as long as my colleagues understand that tabling it sends it off into this netherland. We need to let staff know what it is we're looking for. Thank you.
Further discussion? Councilor Smith, then Marmlawi.
I would add that, the big thing that changed from the point where an initial draft was developed and now is the fact that we've got our carbon neutrality commitment that council has made, which impacts this document and, needs to be revised. I think when the Environmental Commission voted to recommend that this body approve the plan, we all recognize that this is light on the language we would like to see regarding zero waste and carbon neutrality. But it also moves the ball forward for things that have been problematic for a number of years, notably year-round organics collection, and then the resolution that we passed to reopen the MRF was really the primary focus of the Environmental Commission. I think being able to move those two things forward is important, and the Environmental Commission certainly wants those things to happen. I think it's worth taking into consideration some of the information that the Sierra Club memo raises. I think, addressing some of the carbon neutrality issues that are now required, I think is a useful thing to do. And I know that one of the sticking points for the Environmental Commission was in metrics. How are we tracking all of this information? How are we going to determine what's successful? And how do we do that? And one thing that this report was quite light on was on recommendations that way. And I know that there is a subcommittee working on developing some target performance standards.
Councilor Marmlawi.
Thank you, Mayor, and thanks to staff for putting this together. There's been a lot to wrangle and put into a document. It came to us in its complete format, a lot to look at, a lot of details. We're policymakers, so I feel that that's where I need to stay. But there's a lot of things in this plan I think that need addressing, and I'm glad it's being tabled. I was hoping that it be postponed at least until our full-time city administrator was here to answer some of the questions that we have. I'm not really swayed very strongly about the savings that are projected to happen under this plan. There are way too many variables, and that won't move me very much. I want to see certain policies implemented. We're only looking at a 5 to 10% reduction in our waste, which is woefully too low. We're putting these climate action goals and measures on the shoulders of benevolent business owners that want to pay more to have their organics taken. That's not really going to get us to the level that we need to be at. We need to be doing more. We need to be, there is a greater good that needs to be applied here and paid for. This is not something that we're going to just put on individual businesses in the downtown area and say, well, if you pay an extra $4,000 or $5,000 a year, you can go to bed with a better, clear conscience. That's not what I'm looking for. I'm looking for all the organics to be picked up, regardless if that small business owner is going to pay more or not. We're not looking at that. We're adding more red tape. When we look at FOG, the fats, oil, and grease, that's just more red tape for small, beleaguered businesses to go through. It's just, these things I don't think are very pragmatic in achieving the goals that we set out. And I'm not going to be swayed by the facts, well, I will be swayed by the facts, but the figures that are being put in here, I don't think it's worth it. I think we need to have these other issues that I outlined addressed and worry about how we're going to pay for it. There is room under our millage to increase our fees, but I really don't like some of the details in here, and I can talk offline with that. But it's a good starting point, but there's a lot that still needs to be done with it.
Further discussion of the tabling? Mr. Fournier.
Thank you all. I just want to let everybody know that I appreciate the comments, that are thankful to staff for the work that they put in on this plan. If it's the desire of the council to delay this motion for some time, staff will certainly comply, and we'll look forward to a conversation about how the plan, how we can move forward with the plan. I want to just reiterate the excellent work that city staff has done on this plan. I know Crescent, Eileen, Craig, Molly, others have been involved in this. They've really poured their heart and soul into this work for quite some time. We retained an excellent consultant with an excellent reputation who I think has given us a very good product. So given the cost and the time that has been expended on this, I would like us all to keep in mind that it's important to move forward with the solid waste resource management plan and make sure that we get value out of the process and the effort that we've put into this thus far. So again, appreciate the comments, and we look forward to council's direction on this issue.
Councilor Lum.
Thank you again, Mr. Mayor, and thank you, Mr. Fournier. When I said this was an outstanding report, this is, in all my years, I can say unequivocally, this is the most thorough, well-researched, documented, data-driven report I have ever seen the city produce. It is exceptional. And lots of questions were asked, and you can go to the council Q&A. It's attached as a Legistar item. We got 77 pages in response material tonight. And because of the holiday, we got it this evening. Thank you, staff. Most of the response material, there are attachments related to what we're talking about. So we've gotten a boatload, and that's an gross understatement of information relative to this. And again, I cannot commend staff enough. And one of the questions I did ask, and maybe Mr. Hupy, I see you over in the corner, there among other things, 24 intertwined, recommendations that staff, we need to move on. And one of the issues has to do with competitive bidding of the service, and I'm looking for that particular question, which I did ask about. And we were supposed to undertake that relatively soon. You want to speak to that, Mr. Hupy? When we talk about tabling, we can't lose sight of this. I think you said it's anticipated, now I see your response, the procurement documents will be issued by the end of January 2020.
That's the current timetable that was predicated on the plan
Approving.
passing
Right.
tonight. We could adjust that as the plan is re-looked at, but that is our timetable to move forward with the procurements going out the end of January for bidding, understanding that we have the end of June that the current contracts expire, even given that with the procurement of trucks for whoever would be the proposer that would receive the contract, it's likely we would have to do some extension of existing contracts because the lead time on trucks is nearly a year.
Right.
So, yes, we are aware of the time constraints.
Thank you very much. And if I may too, Mr. Slotin, I want to call you out because for your many years of outstanding service to our city, and you're the lead on this.
Yes, he is the lead on it.
Yeah, and you're here for what, another week, I believe?
3.
3 weeks, okay. So
And
colleagues,
I will take
that's
that.
also something to keep,
I will take that lead to introduce Elaine Naples, our Resource Recovery Manager, who has been hired to step in the shoes behind Chrysler.
Big shoes to fill, yes. So thank you all. So I will not be supporting tabling. Again, we've got comprehensive set of recommendations that are sound, logical, and one of the things I truly love about this is that that the basic approach that's being taken here is to generate savings for desired new services, and to take that approach, rather than just raise the cost of taxpayers, to override, do a Headley override with the solid waste millage and move it back from, it's now 2.35 back to 3 mills. I think our taxpayers pay plenty. So to generate savings the way this proposal does, to save that cost, added cost for our taxpayers is huge. And I also hope that, that the whole competitive solicitation effort is not a waste of time. I am skeptical that we'll resource business away from recycling on Arbor, and that this competitive solicitation will be a waste of time. I sure as heck hope not. We owe that to our taxpayers. No one has a God-given right to do anything. We owe it to competitively bid. It's their money, and we have to treat it that way and view it that way. Thanks.
Councilmember Hayner.
If we vote this tabling down, then we will have the opportunity to ask our questions of the staff here in the room. Is that correct?
Correct.
Thank you.
Further discussion? I'd just like to, finally, I'm going to support the tabling, and I also want to echo my thanks to really, certainly to staff and the consultants for the hard and detailed work that has been done here. I'd like to thank the Environmental Commission. They have been long engaged in this process as well, and of course to the several community groups who have focused on this important part of it's an important part of the municipal services that we provide every day. It's the method in which we provide those services. It's the services that are delivered. It is the cost for those services and the economic and environmental impact of those services. This is an important part of the work that we do as a city. It is, I believe, important that we get it right and that we do it in a manner that achieves the broadest base possible of support, and I look forward to helping achieve that, building upon the base of a detailed and well-worked plan. Further discussion? Roll call. Councilmember Ramlawi.
I just want to say I don't diminish the work that's been put in here, and I appreciate Councilmember Lum's his experience on this body to know the quality of this report, and I'm not here to demolish that or take anything away from it. I just would like to see some things applied to this in a more that it strengthens it, and hopefully it does not jeopardize our position when it comes to procuring services for our residents. But I don't necessarily believe this is all dollars and cents. I think a lot of it is about service and value, and the surveys represent that. People are willing to pay a few extra dollars more to make sure that the trash and recycling and compost is handled properly. So, I do feel like the taxpayer would be willing to pay a little bit more in order to get services, increased services that represent the values of the community.
Further discussion of the tabling? Roll call vote, please, starting with Councilmember Smith.
Councilmember Smith?
Yes.
Councilmember Ramlawi?
Yes.
Councilmember Hayner?
No.
Councilmember Bannister?
Yes.
Councilmember Griswold?
Yes.
Councilmember Lum?
No.
Councilmember Grand?
Yes.
Councilmember Ackerman?
Yes.
Mayor Taylor?
Yes.
Councilmember Eaton?
Yes.
Councilmember Nelson?
Yes.
Motion carries.
CA 17, resolution to increase 1 FTE in the fiscal year 20 Housing Commission budget to administer additional housing vouchers. Moved by Councilmember Lum, seconded by Councilmember Grand. Discussion of CA 17. Councilmember Lum.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. This item is to add an FTE to the Ann Arbor Housing Commission to process about 100 new housing vouchers the city has recently been awarded from HUD. Receiving the additional 100 vouchers totaling about $900,000 is really good news, worth mentioning, and the award also includes about $70,000 to pay for the related administration costs. My general rule is to reject budget amendments during the course of the year and outside of the regular budgeting process. I believe strongly that it is just not solid budget discipline or fiscally responsible. We debate priorities, discuss the budget in detail in work sessions, and then approve a budget after a lengthy, robust process. Approving one-off actions outside that cycle just isn't proper process. But like most general rules, occasionally there are valid, appropriate exceptions. For example, when you have a situation like this one, where a specific event occurs during the year that wasn't anticipated in the budget, and that event drives workload, and not meeting that workload has specific adverse consequences, then in my view, it is appropriate to adjust the budget. And that's what we have here. The voucher awards we just received were not expected when the budget was approved. They obviously drive workload, and if we don't use the vouchers, we lose them going forward. So there are specific adverse consequences of not acting. For me, this is a valid exception. Plus, the added vouchers are automatically renewed annually, so this is not a case of staffing up for a one-time temporary workload increase, which isn't fiscally prudent either. Again, it's exciting that we received this significant added award from the federal government, and I'll be supporting this resolution tonight. Thank you.
Further discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? It's approved with 11 council members present, all voting in the affirmative, thus satisfying the 8-vote requirement. CA 18, resolution directing the city administrator to develop an ordinance amendments for the purpose of regulating short-term rental properties. Moved by Councilmember Lum, seconded by Councilmember Grand. Discussion, please, of CA 18. Councilmember Lum.
Thanks. I'm sure several people want to speak to this. And thank you, everyone who's written us and come to speak to us tonight. Your feedback and input has been very helpful. This item, establishing regulations on short-term rentals in Ann Arbor, is another topic that's important to our residents and clearly worth discussing. Short-term rentals of properties, Airbnb and the like, have grown dramatically in Ann Arbor. While we all understand the benefits to travelers, we may not fully appreciate the potential negative consequences, including increased nuisances, altering the character of neighborhoods, and reducing the supply of permanent housing. We have received several emails from residents speaking to these important adverse impacts, especially from the non-owner occupied short-term rental properties. And thank you again to all the folks who've weighed in. Given those potential adverse impacts and the explosive growth, the data we were provided indicated there were 1,400 short-term rentals from July 2018 through June 2019, with 131 properties rented for more than 150 days during the year. And those numbers are probably understated. It clearly makes sense to consider specific new regulations on short-term rentals. I support the approach the city has taken here. First, collecting data, looking at benchmark cities, conducting public engagement, and identifying regulatory options. And then tonight, presenting a resolution for council to consider directing staff to develop ordinances based on a specific framework. While still leaving room for flexibility, having an established framework up front gives council and the community a good sense of what's coming when the specific ordinances are presented to council this summer, and that's very helpful. The framework contemplated here is based on option 3, outlined in the Carlisle-Wortman report. That option 3 prohibits non-owner occupied short-term rentals altogether and would establish regulations for owner-occupied primary residence short-term rentals, including registration and licensing, required inspections, and paying fees. I believe that's an appropriate framework and reasonable place to start, so I'll be supporting CA 18 tonight. Personally, I believe even stricter regulations are appropriate, such as restrictions on spacing, distance, and location, and limiting the number of rental days. And I was encouraged by staff's response to my question that they believe banning primary residence, whole house rentals, when the owner is not present should also be considered. I agree with that, but as I said, This is a reasonable place to start, and council will have the flexibility and opportunity to amend the ordinance proposals when they come to us. I also think these regulations may prompt some owners to try and find ways around them. So when the ordinances come to council, the plan for monitoring and enforcement and to close any loopholes will be critical and likely require additional resources. Anyway, thanks again to staff for structuring a solid approach to addressing this important issue, and I look forward to seeing the ordinance recommendations later this year. Thank you.
Further discussion of CA 18? Councilor Griswold.
I view this as a process, and I believe that the city of Ann Arbor addressed this sort of late in the game. And so we need to balance the needs of the neighborhoods, but I still think that there needs to be some type of grandfathering in of the existing short-term rentals. And so I would like to see that direction to staff. Thank you.
Councilor Ackerman.
Thanks. Eventually, this will be a question to staff, if you want to start making your way up. Thank you. So I appreciate all the work that went into this and facilitating the community conversation. This was a really rich process of engaging everyone who cares about this issue, and for that, very grateful. I'm ready to take this action and give this direction. However, I think that the details are going to be incredibly important, so I just wanted to get a sense of what the process is that gets us from here to July 30th.
Good evening, Mayor and Council. I'm Brett Leonard. I'm the planning manager. So, as referenced by numerous comments, you've heard at public comment this evening. I think you've seen a lot of correspondence. There's a lot of ranging concerns, opinions about this matter, and I appreciate the words. We were proud of the process to open up our ears and our input broadly to hear what the community's concerns and strengths that they saw of these as an opportunity for the city. So this is just that. It's an opportunity, hopefully, for us to validate how we are considering and moving forward towards that July deadline. That process would most likely take this direction from you, as if this is the direction you want to go. And then we would work to implement that in the most effective way that we think appropriate, whether that's inclusive of land use regulations, other registration requirements, and do our best to put forth what we foresee any challenges or opportunities for monitoring and enforcement, and how that should be adequately resourced.
And so on July 30th or shortly thereafter, you anticipate releasing a draft of that ordinance, and then would there be a period for public input again?
I would anticipate public input at a minimum through the drafting process for any land use regulations through the Planning Commission.
Okay.
That would also be shared widely, as any proposed ordinance amendments are through the Unified Development Code. So I would anticipate that we are presenting a more vetted and finalized recommendation to you based on advice of staff as to how to achieve the goals that you've directed us to do so, and any corresponding advice from any appropriate boards and commissions that might be involved.
Okay, thank you.
Councilor Rob Lowy.
Thank you. I guess I'll have a question or two for staff before making a statement. The question is, we'd had a council member suggest grandfathering in existing locations. Is that even legally permissible?
So right now, we don't specifically address short-term rentals in our ordinance one way or another. So we have a lot of other uses, and thus far, that's how they've been sort of falling into the confines of our existing development. Depending on which of these sort of aspects council directs us to do, I can't really say definitively whether that would be viable or not. A lot of that depends on what regulations are ultimately put forward and where they're actually manifested in our codes. So at this point, I just don't know. I mean, the best direction I can take as a planning manager right now is to be clear as to the types of regulations that you see as worth exploring, and we'll present the best set of ordinances wherever those may fall to implement those.
Now, speaking with Derek last week, I was told that there would be areas that staff would suggest or in this ordinance allow for these short-term rentals to exist. Are we targeting just single-family zoning, or are we prohibiting it throughout the city limits?
So the way we're considering it from a staff perspective is not throughout the city limits. We're very much thinking about the impact of these uses and the nature of these uses. At what point do they perhaps change from truly a residential use to a more commercial or enterprise use? And we provide a wide range of districts in the city that we provide a flexibility of multiple uses, both residential and non-residential. I think there's ample opportunity in the city to provide a lot of opportunity for those to continue. I think probably the more specific direction that is articulated either in option 3 or in some of the agenda questions and in the Legistar memo is if council has any specific feedback at this point about taking that a step further as it relates to the other types of rental units, that is the primary residence homestay or the primary residence whole house. Right now, option 3 would provide more framework for primary homestay than primary residence whole house. Staff's perspective is once we start considering the whole house, that probably creates some complications of regulation and monitoring. It's not to say it's not attainable, but when from a land use perspective, our initial thought is whether you as a resident are vacating your house for 3 weekends or a property is renting it out for 52 weekends, the nature of that particular use starts deviating from a residential use.
Okay. Well, I appreciate that. That's all the questions I have right now. Appreciate being here. I will push back a little bit on my colleague's assertion that we're late in the game in the whole process. I think this is a recent phenomenon throughout the country since the last Great Recession, and I don't necessarily think we're late to it. We're a small community with limited resources and a complicated community with a lot of different interests and activities. The issue that we have and we've heard are numerous, are true, and the current situation of the status quo is not acceptable. And frankly, going back to my first question about grandfathering, and we can't even grandfather them in because we don't even know where they exist. And when do we start that clock? So, we don't even have registration and information on the numbers and locations to any sort of reliable standard. I just find this, something that needs to be addressed, and I don't want to disrupt a hornet's nest, but I probably will. This is, where you see capital, unbridled capital, working in ways that I don't think benefit the community to the degree that is being perpetrated to benefit. I do use Airbnbs when I travel, but I also know the costs that they come at. And, I just have an issue when you set up a business in an area that's not zoned for business. I mean, we can extrapolate for quite some time what that means. But the intention of these single-family zoning areas of our community were not intended for this type of new phenomenon. We will have a lot of time and a lot of public input as we draft the ordinances and what they mean and how they regulate this industry, but they do have an impact on the community, and I feel it comes at the cost of the community And we cannot, unfortunately, at a level at the city, tax this industry and use the tax from that to pay for the, the intangibles that come along with it. So unless we get together as a county and propose to tax this, I don't see that as being a current option. So I'll just leave it at that. I'm willing to listen, and I hope that we do find a middle ground where we do allow these to continue to exist in our community. There's a lot of different areas and zoning, and I hope that we can find mutually beneficial ordinance.
Further discussion? Councilor Hayner, Grand, Griswold.
Yeah, thanks, Mr. Mayor. Boy, I do appreciate the public's input on this, and I had some really good conversations with some of my neighbors who operate both owner-occupied and non-owner-occupied, and in one instance, both, short-term rentals. And I also bring a sort of a different perspective to it, because I do maintenance on properties, and I do them on short-term rentals and long-term rentals and homes and businesses. And the differentiation that we hear being talked about here tonight is pretty negligible. When you talk about, hey, we shouldn't have STRs in a R1 neighborhood. Well, do we even know how many are in R1 neighborhoods? How many are in D1, D2? How many are in multifamily zoning districts, and so on? And so I really don't think we have enough information here to act in a draconian way like option 3 reads to me. And so let me just speak to a few things briefly. So when I talk about the maintenance issues, every single owner of these short-term rentals that I spoke to, just these 3 neighbors, they had been long-term rental operators. And they'd go in after 1 year or 2 years or 3 years when their tenant was out, and the place would be destroyed. And so they were so happy to have this platform evolve, this Airbnb short-term rental platform, or VRBO, that they are in there in between every single tenant. And those places have never been better maintained than I've seen them ever. And so these short-term rentals are very well maintained. So I just want to say that as someone who does the maintenance. And we're talking about maybe 1,500 units out of 45,000 total rental units here in the city. So we're like 97%. We don't have a problem with 97% of our units, just 3%. So again, it's a very small amount of units we're talking about here. And their effect on affordability is, it's largely hypothetical if we say that this 3% of units converting from long-term rental affordable to short-term rental, maybe affordable, maybe not affordable, is so dramatic. Well, what are we to say of the 4,000 clearly unaffordable bedrooms we've added through regular development? When we put in all these condo towers and everything, those aren't affordable units. So that's really swaying the balance of our affordability crisis. And so I'm not buying that argument. So when I look at, a couple things, like we talk about we're creating businesses in neighborhoods. Well, we already have businesses in neighborhoods. Laura doesn't have a problem with me running my shop, running my home office, and neither does the IRS. When I get gentrified out of my legal shop space in a commercial district and it gets torn down and they build 51 condos, I move back to my home, my shop at home, and Laura doesn't have a problem with that, IRS doesn't. As far as I know, the city doesn't either, because my neighbors don't complain, I don't have noise problems. And so when we talk about these complaints, I really wonder what percentage of the AAPD is hustling for short-term rental complaints versus long-term rental complaints, which we know are a problem. And so again, I think we got to temper our question of over-regulation of this. So those are the big things. The platforms, I don't know how many folks on council use them. I know some of my colleagues do because we've talked about it. But, the platform has its own controls. If you got a bad tenant, you got a bad renter, not only can you call the police, you can call the host, to use Airbnb's parlance, and that person might have difficulty renting. I've never had a problem using Airbnb in our travels and other platforms because we're good occupiers, we're good guests. But I know a bad guest can get singled right out and not be allowed to stay, and so that's an issue. So I think that it's proper that we recognize that these exist in our community And it's also proper that we perhaps keep a list of where they are, because it fulfills our responsibility as a council and as a city to look out for the welfare of residents and guests alike. But when you look at what we're talking about in option 3, go down and start at the bottom. Regulate primary residence homestay, fees and required inspections. So let's say I have a space, my kid moves to college, my sister comes here from overseas and wants to stay for a couple weeks, and I think that worked out okay. I want to put it on Airbnb for a weekend. Now I'm going to pay a fee, and I'm going to require a city to come into my private residence and inspect my residence. I mean, my residence up to code. But the regulations that we apply to rental properties are different than the regulations we apply to residential properties. There's all kinds of things in the rental property code that you wouldn't come into my house and say, hey, that handrail doesn't have proper returns at the top and bottom. Are all your backflow preventers in place? Are there any chips in your enamel if we take the IOS, the international code? Are there any chips in your enamel or your stoves or your sinks or your tubs or your other fixtures? These are the kinds of things that get a write-up on a rental inspection that you would never do to a private homeowner. And so I think this is kind of a gross overreach, and I think it's a solution in search of a problem, to be honest. The more I look at it, the more I think that we're just, what are we trying to do here? What are we trying to do? What are our goals for regulating these? Can someone tell me what those goals are? And tell me what those are, convince me to support it. That's what will convince me. What are our goals for regulation? Is it to increase public safety? Is it to create a licensing program because we have certain specific concerns? Is it to raise money for the city by changing the taxable value? What are our goals? Somebody tell me what those are, and perhaps I'll support this. But as I see it now, it's too much. Option 3 is too much, and frankly, option 1 is a little too much. I mean,
Councilmember?
It's just too much.
Thank you. Councilmember Grant. Councilmember Grant.
Thank you. This is one that's been trickier for me than usual, I would say, where I can honestly see both sides of the argument, and it's really made me look at arguments of people that I frankly often disagree with, and look at arguments that are made by people that I might tend to agree with more, and have to look at these things carefully. One, I am going to support this tonight because I'm supportive of a lot of what's in the options. I don't know that I'm actually supportive of everything that's in option 3, but I am supportive of this process moving forward, and I think there are ample opportunities for public input. And I really, when I think about the complaints that I tend to get from constituents about short-term rentals, it tends to be, we don't know who the contact person is. There's a problem. We don't know who to call. So I think these occupancy, or there are 9 people in this, throwing a party in this house next to me, and what do I do? So I think the occupancy, licensing, local contact person, that seems, from my perspective, like kind of slam dunk things to put into an ordinance that I think both sides, if you're being reasonable, could agree to. So I do want to move the process, if nothing else, for that reason, because I think there's a lot of value there. I do use this platform for vacations, and when I go to other cities, usually larger cities or more vacation areas, and I do want to acknowledge that I think there are providers of short-term rentals that provide services that are of value to people who are visiting our community. If you're here at the medical center and you want to stay somewhere, if you're here visiting for a few weeks at a time, I do believe that there is value to that. I'm just not sure when I weigh the pros and cons that the value to those individuals is, overrides the value of, say, a family being able to live in a house, or someone not living next to a commercial enterprise. So this is really what I've been wrestling with, and it is a different kind of commercial enterprise than someone who's operating a business out of their home. Having a constant flow of people living in a place that was not designed to be a hotel is different than my neighbor giving cello lessons out of her yard and having some people park in front of my house on a public street, which they're totally allowed to do. So, that's different than, a lot of the complaints that we hear, and concerns about noise, safety, instability, not knowing who to contact. And I don't think that the money that goes into upgrade these facilities, or some of the arguments we've heard about, well, I've been able to make this nicer than some rental properties, outweighs the benefit of a family being able to live in a house, perhaps more affordably. And when we talk about affordable housing, I know, and I want to see that data too. I'd like to see stronger analysis there, but we often are battling for small number of units at a time. And so I don't think that this is really any different than when we're advocating for 10 units in a high-rise to be affordable as well, that sometimes we have to think about the individual lives and individual families when we think about affordable housing. So for those reasons, I'm supporting moving this forward, but hope that we can have some continued negotiations as we go forward.
Councilor Griswold.
Yes, I'd like to ask our attorney if he has any information to share with us on this topic.
Short-term rentals?
Yes.
We don't at this time. We will be providing that. Mr. McDonald is working on various legal scenarios that will inform some of this, and so that will be part of this process.
Oh, okay, good, because I have received some information.
So that will be part of it.
So, okay, all right, thank you.
Further discussion, Councilor Nelson.
I have a question for staff. I went to all three of the Carlisle-Wortman meetings, and there were maps presented of where the high-traffic properties were. And I guess my question for staff is, in looking at those locations that were identified by Carlisle-Wortman, did you draw any connection between what those neighborhoods and like zoning? I mean, I guess I'm wondering if there are any implications for our master planning. I'm looking at one of the possibilities of regulating by geography and sort of creating districts. Did you draw any conclusions from where you saw more activity?
We didn't. One of the problems and the limitations with that data is we can't specifically pinpoint it to property addresses. There's some variability in where it's located. It is latitude and longitude data, despite our consultant and our efforts to try and link that more accurately to properties. We couldn't do it in such a way that we felt that, and there was enough variability in it where they might be along zoning district boundaries. So we could look at that again. It would probably have to be more of a category of zoning districts than sort of district by district. But in short, no, we are thus far have been basing the recommendations on sort of from a use perspective and some of the feedback we heard.
Okay.
I think I want to jump in because there's been a lot of commentary too on why staff maybe made some of the recommendations it did in the way and in the manner that it did. The more we talked about this, more so the geography was, and a lot of it's been mentioned here tonight about home occupations, people being able to run businesses out of their home. And one of the consistents throughout that within our city zoning ordinance and anything else, one of the primary requirements of that is that the owner live in the property. You can't buy a house and run a business there if you don't live there. Nowhere in the city and in no residential district is that allowed. We do allow exactly what was described by a couple of the council members up here. If you live in your home, you can have an office. You can have an architect's office. You can teach music lessons. But at the end of the day, the primary use of the property in a single-family residential has to be owned, and the primary use of it is it has to be occupied by the resident. If you have an owner-occupied property in a single-family resident, the owner lives there and occupies it and is a resident of the city. Under a traditional lease scenario, regardless of whether it's 3 months, 6 months, or a year, if an owner of a property leases directly to a tenant, that tenant becomes a resident of the city and more or less occupies that property with some rights. My understanding, and Mr. McDonald isn't here tonight, that is the break point for us in our recommendation is in a single-family neighborhood. That doesn't exist under a short-term rental scenario under VBRO or Airbnb. The people occupying those properties do not become residents of the city. They don't have leases where they take occupancy of the property. Therefore, it starts to run afoul of what the intent of those zoning districts are, which is to have single-family homes as the primary use. You can, once you establish that as the primary, do all kinds of things as incidental and accessory to that primary. Whether or not it's as a primary renting out portions of your home, whether through Airbnb and other things, for short-term stays. But where we came to our break point was, as long as the primary use was still that the occupant of the home owned it and occupied it, we were comfortable with the use of it, whether it's long-term or short-term rental, for those uses. Where we started to make our recommendation heading towards our option 3 was, when you buy a home and you don't occupy it and nobody occupies it and there's no resident that lives there, it seems to us to start to run afoul of the intent of the single-family residential neighborhood requirements. And that's where the crux of our recommendation, much to our surprise, to tell you the truth, from where we started on this process, came from. How we get there through regulation is still obviously something we need to work out, and we're interested and need feedback from council, whether you guys agree with that as kind of a jumping off point. We know there's going to be nuance to that. We know there's going to be a lot of conversation about how to do that, how to enforce it. I'd also quickly like to touch on the grandfathering thing. Grandfathering these facilities in is difficult because we don't classify or certify rentals as either long or short term. They are rental properties. Whether or not it's a short-term lease or not, we don't track that now. So having a point where we can say how many we have in the city per what we currently have certified would be incredibly difficult for us to do. I mean, we have information that some of our certified rentals are rented through platforms like Airbnb and other short-term platforms, but we don't keep that as a category of property within the city currently. So trying to grandfather in would be a difficult place for us to be. So I just wanted to add that as clarification at this point.
Deputy Nelson, you still have the floor.
Thank you. Yeah, I just have a few comments, actually. I appreciate your explanation of that. Because my family was recently traveling, and we traveled to a community that had, I walked up to the house we were staying at, the Airbnb, and there was a big sign on the outside of the house, hotline, a short-term rental hotline. And so it sent me Googling, and I had sort of this specific example of this town I happened to be staying in. So a lot of these regulations were sort of put into a real-world context for me just recently. They felt very hypothetical when they were first presented to us, but I began to understand them more when I found a specific town to look at. Some of the comments that we've heard from people who are in support of leaving well enough alone, I'm really struggling to see the community benefit that you're asking us to recognize. I do not see Airbnbs as a blight on any community. I've not heard anyone describe them that way. I do know that they are taking away housing that we would rather see. We have the choice to decide that we would rather see long-term residents occupying. I have the anecdotal experience of having had work done on my house recently and needing to be away from it for a night. And it was during the week. There were not any special events going on in town, no particular reason for me to experience difficulty in finding an Airbnb, but I thought, well, this will be an interesting experience. I'll find an Airbnb in my own neighborhood. And I could not find an Airbnb on a random Thursday night in my sort of near downtown neighborhood for less than $250 a night. And my family ended up staying out by Briarwood in an apartment setting where I had access to a kitchen. And it wasn't as convenient because I wasn't close to the bus stops that my kids use and my own workplace that I walk to. As I see it, the way Airbnbs are functioning in our town now is they're creating an opportunity for tourists to be in residential neighborhoods near downtown. And it strikes me that as a community, we can make a choice to regulate at this point and try to protect our near downtown neighborhoods for residents who want access on a day-to-day basis to walking to stores and walking to their workplace and walking to the bus stop. I asked staff in one of my questions to the agenda, because I was wondering about this argument that we're lacking hotel rooms, we're lacking housing for tourists. And I said, well, how many hotel rooms have been developed in the last 10 years? And in the last 10 years, Ann Arbor has approved for development over 1,000 hotel rooms. And an additional 577 are currently under review. So I guess I appreciate Airbnb when I travel. I appreciate that Airbnb, there would be uses for it in this community, but I think we're at a crossroads now, and there are a lot of communities now that are at crossroads in trying to decide, are we a tourism town that's subject to the whim of seasonality and people coming in and out, or are we primarily a community where people are going to live and work in neighborhoods? So that's where I stand. I want to echo the words of, I forget who said it, whether it was Councilmember Griswold or Councilmember Grand. I am confident that there is enough process yet ahead of us, that there are many discussions yet to be had, and there is a lot of room for option 3 as a starting point, and a lot of community discussion and back and forth about how we want to go about this. But I am grateful for everyone's engagement in this issue and participation and discussion about this issue, because I think it's timely. Thank you.
Further discussion? Councilor Smith?
Even though I don't support option 3, I think it's important to move forward on this and start the work, and we can make changes as we go. I think option 3 is the wrong answer, but that's my 2 cents worth. Thanks.
Further discussion? Councilor Lum?
I just would like to also thank staff for all your work on this, and the Carlisle-Wortman report. The fact that it included benchmarking of 5 comparable cities, I found very helpful. And it should be noted that 4 of the 5 do not allow non-primary residents short-term rentals. Only, I believe, Columbia, Missouri allows that. And I think in the information that's been provided us thus far, we know where these high-volume short-term rental properties seem to be concentrated, and not in the 2nd Ward, but the Old West Side, Old 4th Ward, Burns Park areas, and not surprisingly, the volume of short-term rentals are highest in July, Art Fair, and during the fall for U of M football games. So there's certainly a tourist connection, and I appreciate Councilmember Nelson pointing out the number of hotel rooms that have been added. I know we've seen a lot of these site plans come before us, and I happen to sit on the Malice Creek Committee, and Malice Creek includes the Briarwood area, and most of our meetings are to review hotel site plans before they're advanced to the Planning Commission and us ultimately. So there's been a lot of activity in that regard, and it continues. So that I think that's noteworthy as well. And do look forward to, with this, certainly the devil is in the details. And I do hope, again, that we consider in developing these regulations, spacing, distance, location regulations, and limitations on number of guests, even those where the owner is present during the stay. Obviously, to be continued, and there's going to be a lot of engagement on this end and the public end of things. So look forward to working with you, and I appreciate Councilmember Ackerman asking about the process going forward.
Further discussion?
Question? Can I ask 2 staff questions?
Yes.
Thank you. Derek, maybe?
As long as it's not too specific, then it's going to be.
I don't think it will be. So for, in option 3, it says regulate non-owner occupied or vacation rentals. And then the block says not allowed. So in other words, you're saying option 3 is we just won't allow any non-owner occupied Airbnbs. Is that what you're saying there? That's what that means by not allowed?
Yes.
Okay. So if I have a neighbor who owns a duplex that was a long-term rental and is now a short-term rental, both units, it's on the books with the city, they're paying their taxes as a non-primary residence. You're saying if you find out that's Airbnb, you're going to tell them they can't do short-term rentals there anymore? That's what option 3 means?
Which unit? The unit that's occupied or the units that's not occupied?
Neither. It is a rental property, and it's on the books as a city as a rental property, and they switched from long-term rental to short-term rental because they were tired of patching holes in the walls every 2 years.
If neither unit of the duplex, and I'm going to ask Brett to kick me if I'm wrong here because he's got a little more of the detail. If you're talking about a duplex, which is 2 units, if neither unit has an owner occupant, then it cannot be used as a short-term rental. It
So
can be
that-
used as a
so-
rental, a regular rental under a regular lease scenario, but not as a short-term rental under the traditional platforms, no.
Okay, so when you have a building that's properly zoned for rental, like Tower Plaza or some rental apartment building, and it's obviously not owner occupied, because it's a management company's occupying those, you might say, until the long-term tenant is signed. And so we have a 12-month lease, but we have 12-month lease, but we have 8 months of university attendance. And so how are we going to treat the subletter who chooses to use Airbnb as a platform to sublet their apartment in the summer and they don't live there? Are we going to outlaw that under option 3?
Subletting would have to be something we would discuss, I think. I think that gets into the outlier issue or nuisance. I mean, when you have a traditional lease, you have an occupant. If that occupant chooses to sublet, that's different than not having an occupant at all. So it's certainly a nuance within what we're discussing, but what you're talking about is there's still a 12-month lease between the owner of the property and the tenant who occupies the space.
So like
that tenant is in essence the occupant and resident of the space.
So I have a colleague who lives in Northville, and he comes here on an occasional once a year for hash bash. And, he did say Airbnb, and he looks for the cheapest one. And so one time he rented a bedroom in a house. And we walked in there at 2 in the morning, and there was a guy sleeping on the couch, and I'm guessing he slept on the couch so he could make $60 off his bedroom. So that we're never going to be able to manage those sorts of things. And so I fear, and this is for Mr. Postma, I fear that we're not going to be able to apply the law fairly, because there's always going to be situations like that, where it's just sort of a pop-up Airbnb. I need $60 so I can get a bus ticket home. And this guy wants to rent it for hash bash? No problem. I'll stuff all my stuff in my roommate's closet and I'll sleep on the couch. And that's not counted in that $1,500. And I also suspect that not counted in the $1,500 are commercial property owners who own many, many apartments who maybe they aren't all long-term leases, that maybe some are being held aside and done short-term, because we know that it pays more to Airbnb it than it does to do a long-term rental. There we have an example on Ashley, that it was a 2-bedroom apartment upstairs, and the woman flipped it to Airbnb, and she's making more in 6 months' worth of rental than she was making in a year of long-term rentals. And so we know the profit motive is there. So I'm concerned about the path we're going down here and the legal quandary we might be having as we try and identify uses for properties, lawful uses for properties. So my second question, Derek, is if we adopt option 3, are we going to have to put on full-time staff to handle these inspections and licensing and all that?
Well, one of the conversations we have, and again, we haven't determined exactly what we would need as far as additional staffing, if any. What's difficult for us in enforcement is some of the middle ground ordinances you hear about, where we have to count nights, and how do we count nights, and how do we verify someone's used or only used a property 14 nights versus 30 nights versus 35. It's certainly much easier for us to enforce more straight line regulation than it is when you get into asking staff to try to make determination about how many nights a property is used for a certain use or not, whether the owner is actually in the property or not, and how many nights. We have about 30-some-odd thousand rental units that we regulate and inspect on a regular basis with full-time staff. We would have to see the number of actual short-term rentals that registered for us and wanted to be inspected and certified before we determined what our actual additional staffing need was. Putting the regulation in place will certainly make it easier for us to enforce the ordinance than under the situation we have now, where we don't have a defined set of criteria to enforce and are trying to take what we have now situationally in the city and fit it within our existing housing ordinance. So regardless of what those needs are, as far as staff's concerned, having a defined set of criteria, regardless of what that ends up being, is going to be easier for us to make that determination with.
So when speaking to the inspection then, what set of rules and guidelines would you use for performing that inspection? Would it be a rental inspection, or would it be a residential inspection? It would be a rental inspection?
Well,
So
right-
owner-occupied, a room in an owner-occupied home where the person had access to the kitchen, so and the bathroom, all those parts of that home would fall under a rental inspection requirement, and the rest of the home would be residentially inspected?
Well, we haven't made that determination yet. In the districts where rentals are allowed, short-term or otherwise, non-owner occupied, those would be required to be inspected and registered the same as any other rental property in the city. So nothing we've proposed tonight would ban Airbnb across the city completely. It may require that short-term rentals in certain residential districts only take place in owner-occupied homes. One of the questions we have for you, and one of the questions we're still trying to decide, is if you have an owner-occupied home that does participate in short-term rental for a portion, a room, a granny flat, or something that's legally conforming to their property, does council want to see us inspect that property the same way we would any other registered rental? Currently, we do not. We do not, whether it's a short-term or a long-term rental, if it is an owner-occupied structure, we do not require it to be inspected and certified with a certificate of compliance. Because the owner is the primary occupant and they take responsibility for those under their roof, we don't inspect it. We inspect properties where the owner is absent and the people living there have a certain expectation that the city is involved and certified those properties as safe for occupancy.
And that comes
So-
with the requirement of having an agent licensed or registered within 25
Correct.
miles, right? That's all part of that? Okay.
Correct. So one of the decisions that would have to be made, and if council has an opinion one way or the other, is there will be still the ability to do short-term rental in owner-occupied properties throughout the city. Should the city inspect those and certify the same way we do as non-owner occupied rentals? And we're going around in circles as staff as well. That's one of the recommendations that'll come back as part of the ordinance, depending on what decision is made here tonight. It's still something we have to finalize. We will come back with a recommendation, but if council has any input on that tonight, we'd certainly like to hear it.
All right, thank you for answering all that.
I'm going to, thank you. I'm going to support the resolution as it is, and I guess what I've been hearing from council is that some people that there's a little bit of flux as to where people are. If this passes, what I guess I'd suggest and request is that council members, communicate to staff if they have any points of deviation from option 3. That way staff can catalog that, think it through, and then, move forward, incorporate that into their recommendation process. For me, the key difference, well, I don't know if folks that avail themselves of Airbnbs, of short-term rentals, they do not become part of our community. And people who move into residential districts have an expectation that they're moving into a neighborhood, that they're moving into a community. And the proliferation of short-term rentals in residential districts frustrates that expectation. That, for me, is a key difference. There's incomplete data as to safety. There's incomplete data as to the effect on pricing. But I think that the absence of community is unanswerable, and for me is of particular importance. Councilmember Grant.
Thank you. I appreciate Mr. Delacourte's insight and other stuff's insight into this. I think it speaks to the strength of the process and the amount of thought that went into this. I do appreciate the recommendation to us that we do have an ordinance that is clear, that's relatively eloquent and straightforward, so that that there isn't as much room for misinterpretation. And I also just want to caution my colleagues that with any policy, any ordinance that we go forward with, there can always be hypotheticals, there can always be concerns about lack of enforcement. But if we worried about that, we wouldn't have speed limits, or we wouldn't have requirements that people have smoke detectors in their homes. So I think it is important, and it's why we're here, to make ordinances that make our community a better place for our residents to live. And anyway, just looking forward to the process, and I will certainly get some comments to staff. Thanks.
Further discussion? Roll call vote, please start with Councilmember Smith.
Councilmember Smith?
Yes.
Councilmember Romlawi?
Yes.
Councilmember Hayner?
No.
Councilmember Bannister?
Yes.
Councilmember Griswold?
No.
Councilmember Lum?
Yes.
Councilmember Grand?
Yes.
Councilmember Ackerman?
Yes.
Mayor Taylor?
Yes.
Councilmember Eaton?
Yes.
Councilmember Nelson?
Yes.
Motion carries.
Let's take a short break. We are back after a short break. CA 19, resolution to approve the extension of temporary employment agreement between Abigail Elias and the City of Ann Arbor in the amount of $30,000. Moved by Councilmember Hayner, seconded by Councilmember Griswold. Discussion. Councilmember Griswold.
I just want to apologize because I made an assumption and made some statements last night that this was actually an extension of our legal fees for the 1,4-dioxin case, and that is not true. This is actually $30,000 that's going to be funded through public services, and it's for work in that area with a small amount of work being done regarding the dioxin plume.
Further discussion? Councilmember Hayner.
Yeah, thank you, because I had the same consideration till we read the rest of the information, and Ms. Elias has done a fine job here, and I'm sure it's perfectly fine to keep her on for a little bit more. I'm sorry she had to retire, because right in the throes of Gelman, off she goes, but, I just, if we can't, we have, 11 people over there, Mr. Postman? There's like 11 attorneys? And this is a very specific things that she's been kind of conclude these projects. Is that what it is?
Yeah, that's exactly what it was. This has been in consultation with Craig Hupy, and just this process is very technical, and so it's a wrap-up, and you've entrusted me with these transitions, and you don't want everything grinding to a halt right now.
Okay, all right, thank you.
Councilmember Lumlin Griswold.
Thank you. I fully support this extension. The original agreement was for $25,000, and it was intended to cover the period from July 1st, 2019 through November 1st. Ms. Elias's replacement was hired on September 9th. Honestly, I wasn't quite sure why the long overlap was necessary, but given that Ms. Elias is working on Gelman matters, that obviously explains part of the issue. As you know, I wasn't sure why Public Services the budget was paying for this. I appreciate the response to my question about that. And so clearly it doesn't seem to me like it's a, overlap or transfer of knowledge issue, but it's more likely driven by the comfort level of having, an extra person around. No question, Ms. Alliance brings enormous experience. I will just say, as with all good things, I do think we have to break loose sooner or later.
I agree with that.
Okay, thanks.
Further discussion? I'm sorry.
No, that's
My
okay.
apologies. Councilmember Griswold.
I just want to add that I did talk to Abigail today, and I learned some more information. I'm most appreciative of her, so this has nothing to do with her performance. And in fact, it's really a very economical option, because instead of paying the going rate for a lawyer, which is 200 plus, because she's retired from the city income and has returned, we can only pay her $66 an hour. So in a way, we'd probably like to keep her forever, but but we're not going to, and she doesn't want to stay.
She needs to retire.
Yes.
Further discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? It is approved. CA 20, resolution to amend the fiscal year 20 general fund budget by adding one full-time equivalent position and the related funding to the Ann Arbor Police Department. Moved by Councilmember Lum, seconded by Councilmember Ackerman. Discussion, please, of CA 20. Councilmember Lum.
Thanks, Mr. Mayor. And I see the Chief Cox and Deputy Chief, the Deputy Chief are here. This resolution to add an FTE to the police budget is similar in my mind to CA 17, which was the resolution adding an FTE to the Housing Commission. It represents one of the few examples where the situation is such that a mid-year budget amendment is appropriate. A valid, appropriate exception to the general rule the general rule that I apply at least, that mid-year budget changes are poor process and should not be approved. Like the Housing Commission FTE, there is a specific new workload here that, if not done properly and expeditiously, will have meaningful adverse impacts. We've heard from Chief Cox, from Mr. Lazarus, and from the Independent Citizens Police Oversight Commission. Councilmember Ramlawi and I serve on that commission as the council liaisons, that with the Police Oversight Commission gaining steam, it's created a backlog of data and information requests that are not being met now and can be met only with an officer. A primary purpose of this audit and review lieutenant position is to address that problem. As a council, we've committed to do what it takes to help ICPOC be successful, and allowing a backlog of requests to build just isn't in that spirit and could result in slowing the commission's momentum. That's an adverse outcome, and we should do what we can to avoid even approving a mid-year budget amendment. The administrator has indicated that 2 more police FTEs will likely come to council yet this fiscal year as fiscal year 20 budget amendments, a data analyst position and a communications officer position. As much as I support adding those positions and support Chief Cox's efforts to reinvigorate community policing in Ann Arbor, I likely will not support those as mid-year budget amendments. In my mind, those additional administrative additions do not meet the same threshold, addressing an immediate, specific need that, if not addressed, has specific, identifiable adverse consequences that warrant an exception to my general rule of no mid-year, out-of-process budget amendments. No one wants to restore staffing in the AAPD more than I do. I proposed adding staffing in every budget deliberation since I've been back on council. But except in unusual situations, the time for that is during budget discussions and when the budget is adopted, not mid-year. So I'll support this amendment tonight, but likely not the one yet to come. One concern I did have with this resolution initially is the funding source, reducing the provision in the budget for the fire station master plan. The responses to my questions have allayed that concern, however, as apparently we received more revenue from the State Fire Protection Grant Program than we had anticipated in the budget. That's very good news. And because as it seemed at the budget retreat last month, that we were making real progress in putting meat on the bones of this fire station master plan, and I certainly would not want to do anything to set that initiative back. So thank you for listening.
I've realized that I should have asked our stand-in city administrator to make reference. We have before us an amended, an amended resolution rather than one which was initially before us. My understanding is that the primary difference, the lead difference, is that the prior request was for $100,000. The request before us is for $75,000. Councilmember Ramlawi.
Thank you, Mayor Taylor, and, well, that's good news.
That is good news.
I'll have a couple questions for our police chief. Thanks for being here, and as well as the deputy police chief. As with Councilmember Lum, I am the liaison to the Independent Police Oversight Commission. And we've had many meetings and growing pains during those meetings, trying to find our way to the best practices. We're facing some issues with delays when it comes to getting information back to the commission that has been requested, information that can only be apparently redacted, and if you can help me explain that process, police chief, and who's allowed and who's not, because there's a lot of misconception, unfortunately, in the community as to the abilities of the commission to look at documents that, and who gets the, if you can explain that. And in addition to that, the role of this new position, help explain to us again where you think it's going to fit in.
Sure. So I'll start off by, first of all, thank you for letting me come before you today. I want to start off by explaining what this audit and review position really is for. It is a quality assurance internal position to make sure that everything that we are supposed to be doing, we're doing it. We have an internal affairs function that actually investigates allegations of police abuse and things of that nature. But audit and review really is to go and look in all parts of the police department, whether it's property, finance, our day-to-day activities, video footage, to proactively go through and make sure that we're doing what we're supposed to do. It's one thing to say that you're good, it's another to make sure you have data to show that you're good. And that's what it does. It's a position that doesn't currently exist. And so if you're going to have strong internal controls, this is the kind of position you need to do that. And so, it struck me as a certain need as soon as I got here. And that's something I definitely think that we should always have, a strong internal controls as far as what you're doing and how you're doing it. And the only way you can do that is to measure it and actually go out and do the work proactively. And that's what the primary purpose of this. Because of the fact that, part of this position, you look at video, we proactively look at so many different things, it does cross over what IPOC is actually asking for, some of the things that they're looking for. So we can certainly initially start off by having that person start off by helping us go through that backlog, so we're able to get some of the information that they're asking for us, out. Because the reality is we have an internal affairs position of one person. And it's hard for that one person to both look at the cases that come in, stop what they're doing, and then go and give information to IPOC when it's only one person. Their primary duty is to investigate the allegations of misconduct that come through. That's their primary purpose, to make sure that happens. You can't, stop that process to do something else. So we need additional personnel to help address some of the things that they've been asking for. And this position will help alleviate some of the pressure that's out there. You asked about redactions in the lien process. We don't control the lien process. The state police does that. And basically, lien is, to sum it up, the state has a database, really, which is really run by the FBI. And it has all the criminal justice information that most people, law enforcement shares throughout the country. And so there's usually a criteria around that, who can have access to that information. And so the state police have a criteria for who can have access to that. And frankly, many members of IPOC were denied access through the state police, which we don't own, to have access to that information. So we have to personally go through and redact it with our individuals, remember, a unit of one again, to get them this information. We have a ton of video footage, from all officers that when they go out, they have body cameras. It takes, for every hour of video, it probably takes us 3 to 4 hours just to go through to, redact the information to get it out there. There's a lot of manpower involved with just pulling, the information. Never mind the other information that we have to put out there, whether it's FOIA requests and things of that nature. So, IPOC is, I'm all for it, and it's tremendous that it's here, but the reality is we don't have positions to do some of these functions that we're being asked to do. And the primary purpose of the people that currently work there, as a manager, they have to investigate the allegations of misconduct. That's what they're here for. We can't split their duties to say, stop doing that to do this other thing. And that's why the importance of the audit and review, as well as do those other things I talked about, to relieve the pressure of getting that information out for IPOC, so we can live up to the agreement that the city signed us up for. Was that helpful?
More than helpful. I appreciate
Yeah.
Your time in explaining it. I just would like to have it on the record to explain to a lot of that. Obviously, we've had conversations and it's I've heard it from you before, but it's helpful to have it out there for the public to hear, for my colleagues to hear, because there's just some misunderstanding as to the process and who has access to these vital information and the confidentiality surrounding it all. I do appreciate your efforts coming into our community, evaluating the organization that you're ahead of, and trying to make it a more effective force. And I remember you said early on, it's not just adding uniformed police officers, but having a better understanding of where the shortcomings are, and so we can better use the ones that we have. And I feel that that's the spirit of the initiative here, is to have a position filled so that the rest of the force can do their job with better effectiveness. So it's not just adding one; it has a multiplying effect, and hopefully it's more than just one officer. There's a multiplier effect, because those officers that are there are going to have better information to do their job with. So I appreciate that high-level thinking on this, and to dispel the fact that we're just adding more police. It's more than just adding police to the force. It's making them more effective for the ones that we have.
Yes, I agree wholeheartedly. As I said, we talked a little bit about this. It's not about just adding more. It's really making sure you have the right kind. It's a matter of making sure that you're, measuring and make sure that the quality of the officers is as high as it can be. And that comes from basically doing audits and making sure you spot check and do all the things necessary to make sure that not only do we say that we're good, that we actually are good. And along the way, we will find things like any other place who does quality assurance tests, and then we address those and fix those to make the quality better. I mean, that's the goal of it. That's how you run a well-run police department, in my opinion.
Councilor Eaton and Hayner.
I have just one
Oh,
last thing.
I'm so sorry, my
And
apologies.
it's not necessarily a question, it's time for me to get a little political. I will support this, of course, in a mid-year budget amendment. I do think it's imperative that we get ICPOC the information that it's been asking for without delay, as well as make your force a better force. But it's the funding source that I have an issue with. And I really do believe that this is a place where we should be using the county health millage to help fund this position and for the years subsequent to this. I think that the funding source this year is a stopgap measure. We found some money from some other unused source, and we applied it here. But if we're going to fund this position for decades to come, we have to find a better reoccurring source of revenue. We have 7 years left on the mental health millage, and there would be no more justifiable way of spending that tax dollar than to pay for a position like this. So again, I will constantly beat that drum as long as I'm on this council.
Councilor Eaton.
Thank you. I just want to thank you for the good job you're doing. I want to reiterate what Councilmember Lum said. I'm hesitant to add new positions mid-year. Had you been here last year when we were designing this year's budget, I would have expected you would have asked for these positions in a timely manner. So I'll support this, because we've given you a task, and this is what you've told us you need to accomplish the task we've given you. I'm really impressed with the job you're doing already, and so you can expect my support not only on this position, but on the two that are forthcoming. So I really appreciate the good work you're doing, your willingness to meet with us on a regular basis to explain what you're doing, and thanks.
Thank you.
Councilor Hayner.
Thank you. I guess the questions continue. So this is a full-time position, is that correct?
Yes.
Moving forward, this is a full-time position in perpetuity, you might say?
Yes.
Because I saw we did some calculations. This year, 75,000. Next year, 250? No?
Next year,
Where'd I see that 250?
205 in the next fiscal year.
Oh, 205. Sorry, I had a little dyslexia there. Okay. So we approved 2 other sworn officer positions, did we not, in this year's budget? So I guess I don't understand how these roles get filled. I know we have trouble finding sworn officers. So why aren't we just kind of using one of those approved positions in the budget? Why is this an 8-vote requirement outside of the budget? Because of where the funding's coming from?
So
So this is a third.
If I may.
Yes, feel free.
The two positions that were added to the budget were police officers who are on the ground, much like Officer Keller here tonight. Our recruiting staff in human resources and also the command staff in the police department have been working diligently to fill those vacancies, and also vacancies that come up as a result of retirements or transfers or whatever. So there are, generally throughout the course of the year, the vacancies ebb and flow as people kind of transition in and out of the police department. Right now, we have, I think, 3 vacancies, but 3 offers out for them to be filled, so we're at capacity. Those positions have been filled. This position is a police lieutenant in command staff who's a sworn officer. Who will, not be engaging in patrol activity, but will be working with command staff to fulfill the audit and review functions that the chief requires. It was asked earlier why the change in funding to $75,000. It's purely a matter of timing. Our budget staff looked at how, when could this position reasonably be filled, and how much of that salary time is left in the budget year, and it was determined that $100,000 is just a little shy of 6 months of salary funding, which we have already eclipsed the 6-month period in time left in this fiscal year. So, assuming budgetary approval and the contractually required posting process and recruitment process, the feeling from the budget office was that $75,000 would be enough to satisfy the salary requirements for this year.
So the concerns over timeliness are related to the backlog of requests from the Oversight Commission,
No.
but the ongoing use is going to be various internal functions that you've spelled out quite
So,
clearly in your meetings, that, like when Ann and I met you, we
Right.
talked about this position, so.
if IPOC didn't exist, I would be asking for this position.
Yeah.
Because it's an important position to measure, how well you're doing what you're doing. It just so happens, a lot of the things that they'll be looking at, it just so happens that IPOC is asking for that material, and we don't have no one to look at it anyway, to do that right now. So it's a crossover.
Okay.
And so, they get the benefit of this position as far as, relieving some of the burden that we're having right now, is just trying to get the work done.
This is just hypothetical. Do you suppose our 1,400 short-term rentals generate more nuisance calls than our 30,000 long-term rentals? I joke because we emailed earlier, and he's going to get that information together for me, and I really appreciate that. So thanks for all the good you're doing.
Thank you, I appreciate it.
Councilmember Nelson.
Feel free to answer.
With more data, how's that?
Hi, Chief Cox.
How are you?
I have a couple questions that I'm curious about, and so I sort of project that others in the community might be curious about also. You mentioned, so the state governs who can access lien.
Yes.
Do you, even though it's not your purview, I'm curious, what do you know about how the state sets its standards, why ICPOC members would not be able to be eligible?
So they do have a criteria,
Okay.
and, I don't want to speak for another entity, but I could, get the information and maybe forward you the criteria that, they've sent to us as far as what reasons they have, because they control that. And basically, I think part of the criteria is really like, what's your full-time position, where do you currently work? And I don't want to get into it without, actually looking at the criteria, but usually you have to have a nexus to criminal justice or law enforcement, or some nexus to really the criminal justice and the purpose for looking at that material and having access to that material, for a full-time basis, I think, just to kind of summarize some of the things.
Generally speaking, I can add on to that. The requirements that this state has say that you have to be a law enforcement professional engaged with the power to arrest somebody, or engaged in like a coalition of regional law enforcement professionals who work in some public safety capacity. And so the rules are pretty restrictive. We can provide the specific guidelines to you.
Well, I mean, that's sort of the ballpark I was kind of guessing at. I mean, I kind of presumed something like that. Because clearly our ICPOC organization is something that would want access to that information, but a standard like that you have to be working in law enforcement would disqualify volunteer members of a commission. And yeah, there's a logic to that, I guess. I guess my other question was, so you were saying that this internal affairs position is kind of overlapping with some of the needs of ICPOC. And my curiosity was, would that person, if not for the needs of ICPOC, would that person be needing to do all of that redacting? Would all that
No.
redacting be, okay.
No,
So
they-
that doesn't sound like overlap then?
No, but the fact is, looking at body camera footage, some of the things that we're doing, as a result of IPOC's inquiry, they would be doing it anyway. And so the redaction portion is not something that they would do, but the fact is, the overlap is the video itself and some of the things that they're looking at and that compliance, but the actual redaction probably wouldn't be a part of their normal day-to-day activity. But for this purposes, we don't have anyone to do it, so with the extra position, we would certainly basically give them a special assignment to do that until we can address some of these deficits we have.
Okay, and I guess my last question, and this is going to telegraph perhaps how little I know on this subject. What's an example of how a video might need to be redacted for the purposes of?
Sure. So the offices wear body cameras, and we go into people's homes. So when you go into a person's home, we would have to redact if they have kids or things in the background, that we would have to blur out and redact, Yes, things of that nature, as well as, in the streets, there's footage of stuff out there, what people are saying, their names. Without authorization, we just can't release footage of other people. So
Even in a public space, like a street? I mean, if I'm out in a public street, do I have an expectation of privacy?
So we're videotaping, but now we're distributing, that information out. So the issue is, we don't have authorization to publicize, someone else, a bystander, video without their authorization. So we.
So ICPOC, that counts, giving video to ICPOC counts as distribution?
No, so lien covers the fact is, if you're not certified, to have lien information, it's not just video, it's police reports, it's anything that goes through that criminal justice database, that if you're not authorized to use it, then the fact that we give it to someone else is we're violating the law by distributing lien information to outsiders, which means we would be in violation of that and could potentially lose our ability to have, that database, which would be, unheard of for law enforcement agency to operate without that information.
So does every piece of evidence that your department collects in any investigation, does it automatically become part of the lien database? Is that?
Well, it depends on where it came from.
Well, like internally within your department? So here's my
So
hypothetical.
now I'm a little confused, but go ahead.
Oh, I'm sorry, okay. Here's my hypothetical. So
Yeah.
you have body camera footage out on the street in a public place, not in somebody's private home.
Yeah.
One of your officers took it. It's, an incident happened, and ICPOC has questions about that incident. Does that footage, is that somehow part of lien, and that requires redaction as part of?
We don't have to redact everything, but the fact is, if we're having contact with a person, and there's a police officer there, and they had ran the person for a warrant check or something of that nature, and the information on his radio blares out, that's lien information. We would have to blare out, that information regarding some person, because it's their personal information regarding whether they have a license, whether they have a warrant, things of that nature. And so, that's information that we couldn't disseminate. There's a lot of information, their license, if they have a license in their hand, and the video captures the picture of their license, that's lien information. There's a lot of pieces of information that go through that lien system that we have to go through and redact and make sure that we're not disseminating it inappropriately. And it really takes a lot of time because we have to make sure that, we're in compliance with the law.
Okay. I don't want to take any more time, because I realize that ICPOC and our council liaisons on ICPOC should be asking all these questions that I'm asking, and probably are. I just sort of wanted to project some of the concerns that I'm hearing from people, like the ideas about how can we make things more transparent, and sort of anxiety about, are we doing everything we can to be as transparent as we can be? And so I wanted to express some of that. I thank you for answering my questions.
I think, I'm sorry, just to add one final end note on this conversation, just for everybody's benefit, we did ask the state to grant lien access to the Police Oversight Commission members, and they denied that request, so everybody's aware.
Who made that request?
I can't, it was the city attorney's office, right?
Okay.
Yeah.
They asked, I think, Senior Assistant City Attorney Arian Slay had discussions up there, and then wrote a description, and about a month later, they came back with something, so I can send that on to the council.
Okay. I'd be interested in seeing
Yeah.
that. Thank you.
Councilmember Ackerman.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Thank you, Chief Cox, for being here, and to your department for your support as well. I would also just reference Dr. Jackson's letter to council, in which she kind of refers the play-by-play of how the lien process was, I guess, unfolded, and the rejections were issued. Dr. Jackson being the chair of the Independent Police Community Oversight Commission. I think in the last year, we've seen two major changes to the police department. Chief Cox joined us from the Boston Police Department, and we created the Independent Community Police Oversight Commission, ICPOC. You know, we did these two things with some, you know, in conjunction accidentally, but also to our benefit. Chief Cox comes from a police department with, you know, a tremendous amount of experience dealing with communities of color and complex communities. And now we have an entity in ICPOC that can help us to, you know, take a very professional and responsible police department and make them a lot better and make them a lot more sensitive to the issues of marginalized communities. And both of these things, I think, are a great improvement and very exciting. When we endeavored on them over the last year, we committed to resource ICPOC. We committed to figure out what their needs would be over the course of their first year, their inaugural year, and then resource them accordingly. And I think that's exactly what we're aiming to do here. You know, in a letter from Dr. Jackson, the chair of the commission, there's an explicit ask for this. It's not their, it wasn't their plan A, but it's a plan B that seems to be suitable. And I'm encouraged to give them the data they need. As a community, we've also decided that our police officers will wear body cams, and I think that's an important piece of accountability, transparency, and oversight. But part of that means that there's an immense amount of data that needs to be reviewed, and ICPOC needs to have access to that data to do their jobs effectively and liaise with the police department to everyone's benefit. So I see this as absolutely appropriate and needed, and I trust your leadership to make sure that this role is used for the betterment of the community. Also, just with respect to the redactions and the privacy, based on the conversation I just heard, is it fair to say that the primary objective of redaction is to protect the privacy of victims, the accused, and bystanders, as opposed to?
I would say that, but I would say our primary purpose is to stay within the law and compliant with the law. You know, that is, you know, our absolute primary purpose of the redaction, to stay, you know, to fulfill the lien requirements.
Yeah, it is a rare job where everything you do is filmed, and there are a lot of people whose personal lives get caught in that, and don't need to be broadcast to the world. So, thank you.
Councilor Lum.
Thanks. I appreciate the conversation about the need and the work that is entailed with the review of and the handling of the complaint disposition, and our ordinance that we passed stated that the police chief shall make the report within 30 days of the complaint disposition, the report out to the Independent Police Oversight Commission. And what we found is that, we're learning as we go along, as with most things, that we can't meet this 30-day time frame because of the work entailed, and it is labor-intensive work to do the redactions for the purposes that have been explained. And I also appreciate, Councilmember Ackerman, that you are drawing our attention to the letter we received tonight from our chair, Dr. Lisa Jackson. And what we've learned, we discussed this came up, we've had these discussions at the last two ICPOC monthly meetings, and in the course of this, we came to learn about the lien statute, which is a state statute, and the requirement that the, as has been noted, that the redactions have to be done by the police, so it's a staffing issue for Chief Cox. Initially, to assist, the city attorney's office did assist, but it's really, excuse me, a function of the police. And the state law does not allow citizens or citizens oversight group to review unredacted material, and it would actually be a misdemeanor if we did. So we have wonderful volunteers serving on this committee, but we don't want anyone charged with a misdemeanor offense, so, we're following the legal requirements. And so to meet this 30-day time frame, this will assist in that regard. So, again, that was, it would have adverse impacts if we didn't add this position. So, and this position certainly was identified in the retreat materials. It was one of 5 identified. As I stated previously, certainly supportive of the police department adding positions, and Deputy Chief Forsberg did an outstanding job last May when he was standing at that podium and spoke frankly in support of the budget amendment. And so those positions were added at the appropriate time, and I look forward to supporting FTEs that will be part of the fiscal year 21 budget request. Thanks.
Further discussion? I'm sorry, Councilmember Ackerman.
Sorry, just one other small thing. Perhaps as an item that the policy committee could take up is trying to advocate to the Michigan State Police changes in their lien policies. I think that could be a great opportunity to engage Representatives Robbie and Warren and Senator Irwin, and probably a coalition of other representatives of municipalities that have police oversight commissions to try to get MSP's policies changed.
Further discussion? Thank you, Chief. I'm certainly going to be supporting this. I think that the addition of this position will be of substantial utility. First, and obviously to ICPOC, to enable them to do the work that we have asked of them. Second, too, I think as Chief indicates, the police department will benefit, the police department and by extension the community will benefit from a leadership position in the police department tasked with ensuring compliance with policies and accreditation procedures and so forth. This is somebody who's going to have a focus on policy, a focus on procedures, and I think it's they'll do excellent work that will be a benefit to us all. Further discussion? All in favor? Aye. Opposed? It is approved with 11 council members present, all voting in the affirmative, thus satisfying the 8-vote requirement. We have before us the special session minutes of December 8 and 12, the work session, the minutes of December 9, and the regular session meeting minutes of December 16. May I have a motion, please, to approve these minutes? Moved by Councilmember Umlawi, seconded by Councilmember Smith. Discussion. All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? They are approved. DC1, resolution supporting the Environmental Protection Agency's active involvement with the Gelman site and encouraging its listing of same as a Superfund site. Moved by Councilmember Hayner, second by Councilmember Griswold. Discussion of DC1. Councilmember Griswold.
I'd like to move that we postpone this until Tuesday, January 21st.
Is there a second? Seconded by Councilmember Ackerman. Councilmember Griswold, you still have the floor.
The reason for doing that is that we expect to have an update regarding the consent judgment that our lawyers are working on, as well as Congresswoman Debbie Dingell is holding a joint meeting with the city, the county commissioners, township trustees, I think I said Thursday, January 16th. I believe it's at 6:30. It will not be a closed session. The meeting will be open to the public. There will be a time for public comment, and representatives from the EPA and Eagle will be there to answer questions and share information. I think it's critical that before we take a vote or make a final decision in any direction, that we have all of the facts, and I believe that this meeting will be very helpful. And once again, I want to show my great appreciation for Representative Debbie Dingell.
Further discussion of the postponement? Councilmember Hayner.
Yeah, thanks. I guess I'll support this postponement because I agree that, I mean, this thing got bounced from, what, 10/7, something like that, from October? And I thought we would have long had all the information in hand to this point, and, you know, it's possible that we do, but the fact that Representative Dingell is bringing some Region 5 folks together with Eagle to be all in the same room, we can all ask our questions and see what that relationship will be like if we decide to get the EPA involved. I think it's worth one more kicking it down the road, one more session. I know we had a recent situation down there in Madison Heights where the famous green ooze that's been all over the news, and you know, the EPA came in there and they said, I saw the preliminary assessment and the video of that assessment, and they came in there and turned around to DEQ and said, clean it up. And they didn't. And the DEQ failed to clean that up. Now you go by there and the EPA's name's on that fence. And so that's encouraging. I don't see that as a negative for our opportunities with the EPA, that they step back in here. I'm a little disconcerted that the amount of follow-up that was done, but of course that polluter's in prison. And so, you know, that's good too. And so, yeah, let's pass this to one more meeting, and I encourage all my colleagues to come to this joint working session, this joint session, and hopefully you'll be there on the 16th. And I don't think we have a location yet, do we?
Yes, it's the Washtenaw County
it's at the annex?
Learning Center.
Yeah, Learning Annex on
East Washtenaw, just east of Carpenter.
Yeah, so, and I encourage the public and my colleagues to attend, of course, and so for that reason, I'll support this, but I'd like to get on with this. Thanks.
Further discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? The postponement is approved. DC2, resolution authorizing appeals of the denials of the city's petitions to the State Boundary Commission to annex various parcels from the Charter Township of Ann Arbor and the Charter Township of Pittsfield. Moved by Councilmember Ackerman, seconded by Councilmember Grand. Discussion of DC2. Councilmember Bannister.
I had a question on this for our attorney's office. Do we have any estimates for how many hours or costs that the city would incur to appeal this annexation to the circuit court?
We don't at that time. Filing the claim is quite easy, the initial claim with the circuit court, and so that's not time-intensive. The record's already set, so it is not a case that has discovery, but I can't give you an estimate yet until I sit down with Mr. Wilhelm and we look at that more closely.
Do you have like a range of attorney's office time? The reason I asked is because we have limited attorney's office resources, and I'm concerned that after the State Boundary Commission and the LARA director turned down these annexations because of the high cost of homeowners to connect to the city utilities when they already have functioning wells and septic systems in many cases, many of them new within the last 5 years. I'm concerned that the city is spending our unknown limited resources to pursue appealing.
Councilmember, what I recommend is, obviously, with any litigation, we could talk about that ongoing, and if it becomes a situation that you want to change at any point, you know, you could certainly do it, or we could withdraw the appeal and so on. But I think that we're on some time crunch to get this filed on the 17th, and so that's what the resolution is for tonight. And we've already provided you advice on the reason for this.
I'm sorry, you were far away from your microphone.
I'm sorry, I was mumbling, but Obviously, as with any litigation, you can change your view and ask us to dismiss it or get it settled, although in this case, it's an appeal. And so what we're asking tonight is we have a time period to file the claim. That's not time intensive, and, but that is due, I think, on the 17th.
Would it be possible then, after you file it, to give provide counsel a range of costs to pursue it, and hours and
Yes.
attorney's time?
Yeah. Probably at the next council meeting, I'll have a better sense.
Publicly available on that, because I think the public has a right to know how much time the attorney's office is spending on this sort of activity. So I would appreciate it if you would follow up on that later on. Thank you.
Well, let me think about that, but I'll certainly give that information to the council.
Further discussion? Councilor Graham, then Hayner.
Thank you. Briefly, I'd just like to express my thanks to the Attorney's Office for defending council policy as we expect you to do. I'm honestly surprised this even needs to come before us, and I understand how time-sensitive this is, and I'm grateful that we were able to bring Mr. Wilhelm on to our attorney staff, as he has a lot of expertise in municipal law, and hopefully he can be successful in helping us comply with this policy that's been established for decades.
Councilor Hayner.
Thanks. I was just trying to locate the attachments that are referred to in our agenda because it didn't pull up with my electronic copy of the agenda. I'd just like to read what I vote on. Does anybody, could the clerk or someone forward those to me? They weren't attached to anything that I've received.
You mean the signed orders?
I beg your pardon?
Those are the final signed orders, yes. Yeah.
Those would not be attached to our agenda because
I
it's...
don't know, they're listed as attachments.
Right, I know, but they're not. And DC2 isn't even on that sheet, so. I mean, it's on the printed sheet, but it didn't show up on my electronic copies.
There might be an amendment, an amended packet.
Okay.
Which occasionally rolls in as well.
This was added very late to the agenda.
Yeah, I mean, I downloaded tonight's when I got here.
There's a packet addendum.
Right, I know. It didn't show.
It's listed as DC1 on the agenda.
Thank you.
And council does have all these signed orders. We sent them to you also in November, so I can find it.
It's the same orders?
Yes, it's the same orders you had in November.
Further discussion? Councilor Nelson, thank you.
Actually, since we're on sort of the procedural topic of Councilmember Hayner not being able to find it, I was curious why this landed on the agenda quite so late. I know we were having a weird agenda anyway because of the holidays and everything, but I think this landed on the agenda like Friday or Friday afternoon.
Yeah, I sent an earlier communication before New Year's, just
December 13th.
The issue had to do with whether or not we needed to actually have a vote on this, because Mr. Wilhelm went back and we looked at that issue, and the underlying resolution was specific as to filing the claim, and therefore, and we briefed this in a memo to the council, and so because we looked at that again, we determined that it technically didn't meet that qualification, although it's completely consistent with this. Obviously, when the initial resolution came in, we would draft it differently. It was actually unheard of for the State Boundary Commission, who encouraged the city to do this as fast as possible. So the fact that they would deny it was not even contemplated.
So between, okay, thank you.
Councilor Lum.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Yeah, it seemed like it was a bit of a gray area, but it's clearly better to handle this with a council resolution at a public meeting, so I appreciate that this was added to authorize the appeal, and as you noted, Mr. Postum, the guidance by the commission that we needed to finish these annexations expeditiously. So it's a little counterintuitive, and I appreciate her taking this action, and it also directs that we will not ignore the prior agreements between the city and the townships. These are long-standing agreements, as noted by Councilmember Grand, so I appreciate your work on this as well.
Councilmember Hayner.
Yeah, I don't, thanks. I got to read through it, so I appreciate my colleague handing that over to me. So, where this stands is, the body, I don't recall if I supported this or these or not, honestly, but, the body did what the commission has asked us to do, right? And then the homeowners appealed that decision higher up and found that the state agreed with them. And when I look at their complaints, I'm very sympathetic with their concerns. I mean, they're basically asking for self-reliance and water autonomy. And that does seem like sort of a basic human right. You got a perfectly working well and septic field, and then the city wants you in, all of a sudden, you got to abandon that well and field eventually, and at great expense. I'm very sympathetic with their concerns, and I'm not surprised that the state is going backwards on this, because that's been the tenor of the state lately, has been to stand up. Well, I won't say that, it's too broad a statement, but it does, I'm not surprised by it, and I got to say, as a body, we did what the state asked, and they've appealed, and I'm not so certain that I support this fighting that. I think I might agree with the courts in this case. I'm sorry to say, I think I agree with Laura. I understand
The court hasn't ruled.
Well, I mean, with Laura, I think I find myself in agreement with their decision, so you're going to hear a no from this end if we have a roll call vote.
Further discussion? Councilmember Lum.
It's not surprising. Frankly, had a pretty sweet deal for a lot of years, but there is an agreement, a long-standing agreement to annex, and this has been well-known, well-documented. It's, again, very, very, very long-standing, and I think there are issues of equity for those folks who live next door to some of these islands in the very same neighborhoods who do pay Arbor taxes. So, again, this is to pursue fulfillment of these agreements. These are legal agreements that we all signed off on. I realized my microphone was not on, but I just turned it on, but I won't repeat what I just said.
Further discussion? Councilmember Umlawi.
Yeah, I wasn't going to speak on this. I thought it was going to go without much deliberation. I think it's dangerous for us to debate this policy ad hoc in midstream here. I'm looking at some of these documents, and these documents are signed October 1st, 1994. This is a long time ago. Folks have known about these planned annexations for decades. It's unfortunate that they are facing a higher property tax bill, but it should come to them as no surprise. We have made it more financially palatable to connect to the sanitary line. It was one of our first ordinances that we approved here on council to give folks up to 10 years to switch to the sewer. They definitely need to connect to the water because of state law and county laws, but I just feel like nothing has really changed in our initial vote that we asked our city administrator and the legal department to pursue the annexation. Nothing has changed in our position. Our policy has not changed. Why would we not pursue this in the next level? I will be supporting this, and I think we should be all supporting this.
Further discussion? Roll call vote, please, starting with Councilmember Smith.
Councilmember Smith?
Yes.
Councilmember Rumlawi?
Yes.
Councilmember Hayner?
Nope.
Councilmember Bannister?
No.
Councilmember Griswold?
Yes.
Councilmember Lum?
Yes.
Councilmember Graham?
Yes.
Councilmember Ackerman?
Yes.
Mayor Taylor?
Yes.
Councilmember Eaton?
Yes.
Councilmember Nelson?
Yes.
Motion carries.
Are there communications today from our city attorney?
No, Mayor.
We have before us the clerk's report of communications, petitions, and referrals. May I have a motion, please, to approve the clerk's report? Moved by Councilmember Lum, seconded by Councilmember Grand. Discussion. All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? The clerk's report is approved. We now come to public comment general time. Public comment general time is an opportunity for members of the public to speak to council and the community about matters of municipal interest. To speak at public comment general time, one need not have signed up in advance. Speakers have 3 minutes in which to speak, so please pay close attention to the time clock. As a matter of courtesy, we may have only one person speaking at a time. And finally, if you require assistance in speaking before council today, we'd be delighted to provide it to you. Is there anyone who would like to speak at public comment?
Could you hold the clock until I access my speech on my computer? The computer is slow.
If it's going to be a moment, perhaps there's someone else who'd like to speak.
Well, is there? Well, you go first.
Thank you. Thank you.
I wanted to speak on the short-term rental resolution that was passed. I guess my question to council that I'd like you to think about is, if you can do a student rental anywhere, why, even though they're signing a lease, they're sure not adding to the quality of any neighborhood? And I would say that, why would you legislate the difference between a short-term renter coming in, who in many cases has more of a connection to Ann Arbor than any student ever will? And most people are coming here either because of an event at the university, with a student here, medical, or something like that. Excuse me. So it seems to me we shouldn't be legislating the difference. If we're looking at rentals, look at student rentals and all the rest. The people who have invested in short-term rentals, if for some reason the resolution goes through as passed, and they all turn into student rentals, then what happens to all those neighborhoods that all those people just spent updating those houses? And the neighborhood looks a lot better with the short-term rental houses than it ever did with the student rental houses. My other question is, feel like the voice of the community. You talked a lot about that when you do this legislation, that there will be a lot of input from the community, yet I feel like the community gave a lot of input, and yet this resolution still passed. I was at all the community meetings. The feeling of everybody at those meetings, except for a few people, was do nothing or do very little, and suddenly we were at number 3, do the most. So to me, I agree with Jeff. This is a problem that we have no definition of what the problem is, and yet we've come up with a resolution of completely shutting it down, and it makes me wonder how much input would really be listened to when the ordinances are actually being created. So I hope that it's an opposite in effect, and there actually is people listening to what people are saying they want, instead of anecdotal examples from specific neighborhoods or specific people who've traveled to places that aren't like Ann Arbor in any way, shape, or form. That's it.
Thank you.
Thank you. Oh, I'm sorry, I did have one more thing. And you're penalizing those of us who have followed the rules, who have agents in town, registered agents, who have registered their properties, have had them inspected. And if you want to know how many short-term rentals there are out there, add it to the registration. So those of us who do follow the rules can say it's a short-term rental. Then you can see how many there are and give people a date to say, if you want to be grandfathered in, here's your date. Make sure you're registered here. We'll grandfather you in because now we know that you are a short-term renter. That was it.
Thank you.
3 rationales are proposed for the Ann Arbor annual deer kill. Traffic safety is a fallacious rationale, given that most drivers exceed speed limits. This is based on my personal observation. So that strict enforcement of lower speed limits and other better highway engineering would reduce deer vehicle collisions and save motorists, cyclists, and pedestrians from injury. The Ann Arbor Observer in June 2019 reported that Ann Arbor pedestrian accidents are increasing, and that from 2000 to 2008, there were 7 deaths. But from 2009 to 2017, including 2 years of the cull, there were 9. I commend Councilor Griswold for her criticism of the city's inadequate pedestrian safety measures. That cull proponents are not serious about disease prevention as a cull rationale is shown by the use of deer baiting in the cull, which the Michigan Department of Natural Resources has banned in the Lower Peninsula because baiting spreads chronic wasting disease. CWD, like mad cow disease, might cause Creutzfeldt-Jakob disease in humans, a form of dementia. Accordingly, donating venison to food kitchens, another cull element, is also unethical since indigent clients may not know what they're eating. The only rationale for the deer cull which makes any sense is habitat destruction. That this is also a red herring is shown by the votes of 3 cull proponents for Ordinance 19-30 to rezone 7.7 acres at 2857 Packard from single-family dwelling to planned unit development, which entails cutting 300-year-old trees. I commend Councilors Eaton, Griswold, Remlawi, Bannister, and Nelson for voting against this habitat destruction. Councilor Lum voted both to kill the deer and to cut the trees, and has an unethical relationship with Washtenaw Citizens for Ecological Balance, the originators of the cull. Apparently, the only habitat which matters to Ms. Lum is her affluent and politically connected friends' gardens. Thank you.
Is there anyone else who'd like to speak at public comment? Please.
Hi, I would just like to start out by asking how many council members attended the short-term rental community meetings? Just show of hands. How many attended all of them? How many folks in here attended all of the short-term rental meetings? So my point being that your job as elected officials is to represent your constituents. And had you been at all of them, you would know that there was a resounding opposition to option 3. I have a short-term rental. My family has short-term rentals, and I am not opposed to regulation, as I think most of us would agree. We believe that there should be registration. We care about our homes. I don't want a football rager at my house, trust me, okay? I screen the people that I rent to. I'm a very responsible neighbor. The person who lived in my home prior to me was a single man who traveled 80% of his time. None of the neighbors on my street even knew his name. I know every single one of my neighbors. They see me on a weekly basis. I may not sleep at my house, but I am there weekly. I take care of my lawn. I plow my driveway. I shovel my sidewalks. None of that was done before I moved into my home. I would gather if you asked my neighbors who would they prefer on their street, they would say me. I currently am renting to a family, mother who is a high-risk pregnancy. She will be delivering her baby at U of M, and if her baby survives, will likely end up in the NICU for several weeks. If she does not have a home to go to, she could not be in Ann Arbor. She cannot be in a residence inn. She cannot afford a hotel. There are also issues with safety and cleanliness. We have rented to oncology patients who have come to Michigan for treatment. They cannot stay in hotels. When you're going through chemotherapy, there's germs. It's a sanitation issue. They need a private residence to live in. I think there's a lot of poor assumptions that have been made by a lot of people here. There's a lack of education in our community on how short-term rentals are run, how they're regulated. There's a lot of talk about taxes, and we don't pay occupancy taxes when that's false. And I think these assumptions need to be explored. I think there needs to be data. My husband is a 22 veteran of the police department. Not once has he been called to a short-term rental in his career. If you ask him how many times he has been dispatched to long-term rentals, to student housing, to irresponsibly managed sublets, he will tell you it happens on a daily basis. There are students that sublet their apartments on campus for 2 months and 3 months. That is not regulated, and that should be subject. If you're going to regulate short-term rentals, that should be included. Thank you.
Thank you.
I'm also going to talk about the short-term rentals. Took some notes. So I'm pretty bummed about council members that voted yes, despite saying that option 3 was not the way to go. That's what this vote was about, and you guys are supposed to be leaders, so maybe have a backbone. But I agree with Councilman Hayner about this seems like it's a solution in search of a problem. I don't think this is about affordable housing. I don't think it's about changing character of neighborhoods. It's only 3% of houses. I don't think it's about ordinance violations because we're not talking about how to enforce existing ordinances. The only point that makes sense to me is the zoning issue that they brought up. But I feel like trying to fit the new sharing economy into old zoning laws is just not going to work. We need to adapt with the times, and we get to make the rules. So I don't understand why we're doing this. I don't understand why we're doing it in such an extreme way. 95% of Airbnbs are non-owner occupied, so you're effectively banning Airbnb by imposing the owner occupancy regulation. I just can't figure it out, so.
Thank you. Is there anyone else who'd like to speak at public comment?
Dwight Smith, the only ongoing nonpartisan presidential candidate ever. I've spoken before the council before. Several of the members are new. The point I would make is one that I've made before. And that is my father is a real, genuine PhD wildlife biologist, and he would tell you that culls do not work. They're a gross waste of tax money. Thank you.
Thank you.
Like others before me, I'm talking about the short-term rental issue. And I know it's late, so I'll try and make it brief. But on the plus side, look at how many of us are getting involved in local politics that have never been here before. So this is my first city council meeting, and it was, yeah, I'm glad that I came. So I just want to speak a little bit on the human side of it. So obviously, there have been a lot of people who've invested a lot of money in houses that feel like they've been misled, and a lot of people who are improving their neighborhoods who feel like it's not really adequately representing them. But on my end, so I've spent kind of like the last 2 years or so building a small business in Ann Arbor. And I'm just tired, so it's not like I'm not tearing up or anything. But yeah, I've spent the last like 2 years building a small business, basically helping people manage their Airbnbs in town, and spent a lot of nights, a lot of weekends building it up, and have a few cleaners who are helping me now. And for us, this is a livelihood. This is kind of like, this has a large impact on what we do as careers. So I just kind of want to put a face on that side of it and say, there are people who live, it's not just, it was mentioned that we shouldn't prioritize people who are coming into town over the neighborhoods of people who are living in town. Just kind of want to mention that there are people who are living in town who are also, being severely impacted by this decision. So I just hope that that's kind of kept in mind going forward as, the comments are made to the city staff. And just like on the point of the prioritizing people who are from out of town, there are hotels downtown, but they're largely expensive, and I kind of mentioned this in my public comment. If you really are on a budget and you're trying to stay downtown, there are very few options, and so a lot of the people who are staying in the places that I work with are people who are kind of fit into that category. And I think, we want people experiencing downtown, and obviously that does come sometimes at a cost that's been mentioned, but I think that that's important for people to be able to stay downtown who might not otherwise. And like a lot of other people are mentioned, there really are a lot of people coming to the hospital and coming in for extended stays who are looking for these kind of options and who really benefit and who aren't going to get that from owner-occupied options. So it's a really, you don't necessarily see it, but as hosts we see it, and there is a need for that option. So the last thing is just that we're taking literally one of the most restrictive approaches of anywhere in the country. I mean, there are other cities doing things like this, but it's few and far between. And so other cities are finding a way to regulate this effectively without just doing an all-out ban. And I know a lot of people said that they're kind of for that, but once we register short-term rentals, we know where they are, we can limit the amount in neighborhoods, we can create solutions that help both sides. And so I just hope that we're not going to just jump into the most restrictive approach just because it seems easy. So thanks a lot for your consideration.
Thank you.
I must say, I also come to talk about the short-term rentals. Yesterday, I was here, and I pretty much say the same thing. And I'm really, really glad to actually understand that many of you on this panel actually have had the opportunity to use Airbnbs and short-term rentals in your travels all around in your businesses. You see, when everybody talked today, everybody had talked about how we prioritize the neighborhood above the visitors that we get or people who are vacationing. The truth is that it's not limited to people who are actually vacationing or occasionally coming here to watch football. The truth is that actually some of us who are operating these services, giving these amenities, we're actually helping our neighbors as well. I talked about yesterday about let me slow down because actually I'm one of those angry landlords. I've done more than patching walls that I care to do. Thank you, Councilman Henner. I've changed commode, I've changed tiles, I've done it all. I've been renting houses for over 2 decades. I'm tired of doing that. So I sold all my properties. When I moved to Ann Arbor, I wasn't going to rent anymore. But this opportunity came. And for me, as having a family whereby we don't have the option of using hotels, my kids have allergies. So I have to stay in Airbnb. I have to wipe every plane down before I put my kid on the plane. I have to do the same thing in hotel rooms. So do unto others as you wish they do unto you. That's my model. So when I travel all around the world and I've had the opportunity to stay in great places where our children were able to play, the same, I decided that while I'm in Ann Arbor, I'm going to provide that for other people as well. So I dove into this thing. So what you guys have passed tonight is really killing the spirit that I have and the love that I have for this city. Because my idea is that the Ann Arbor that I'm experiencing in the 13 years that I've been here, I want to share it with somebody else. And I can tell you, in the time that I've been here, 1 year that I've been doing this now in Ann Arbor, some of our neighbors here in Ann Arbor, their house burned down. They stayed in our Airbnb. Right now, my wife just sent to me another person that we are hosting right now because I don't even keep track of it, had an accident, almost fatal accident, and he's returning back to U of M to finish up his degree, and his parents have to come stay with him. This is how we are helping our neighbors, people. This is not just about travelers or footballers alone. I'll stop at that. Thank you.
Thank you.
Hello, everybody. Happy 2020. I don't really know where I'm going to go with this, but I guess, first of all, I'm in a pretty good mood today because I luckily found a place where I can move in, so I no longer have to sleep in my car, which I had preferred to than the warming center at the Delana Center. That was where I think I previously had said there were 70 beds crammed in one room with a lot of people sick, and I kind of decided that the hypothermia or pneumonia I could catch in my car would be better than that environment for me. So that's what I have been doing. I will not tell you where I parked because, a reason why you don't hear a lot of homeless voices here is because they won't go anywhere near City Hall. They won't go anywhere near the police station because of harassment, or whatever, or the fear of harassment, not real or imagined. They're just in that kind of position. I met a man who, I usually ran into him a lot on the streets, hadn't seen him in a while, and then I saw him. He's like, "Hey, man, I've been in jail for 17 days. I'm like, you know, they finally got me on this warrant that was, he told me it was from petty theft, and really the jail time was from like failure to appear in court. So, you know, there's those kinds of issues. But I also wanted to speak up about the deer, because I do have an opinion on this. Well, before that, I'll end with that, but before that, I want to say that this is on December 16th. The U.S. Supreme Court on Monday left a lower court ruling in place that struck down a law making it a crime to sleep in public places when homeless shelter space is unavailable. So just so you know, a statement, it is legal to sleep in a public park or a street as a homeless person, and I hope the police will know that. But about the deer, my solution is to reintroduce wolves. You know, you get some wolves here, that takes care of it right away, you know. And there was a time when people on this land that we squabble about for every rich reason and way coexisted with the deer and the wolves. So,
Thank you. Is there anyone else who'd like to speak at public comment?
You guys are breaking a lot of hearts tonight with this short-term rental stuff, so I'm probably going to be the last person to talk on it, so hopefully you guys won't have to hear too much more of it. But I just wanted to go through a few things. So first off, it's already been said, but really it seems like the general support for Airbnbs on a percentage basis is pretty overwhelming. I mean, I'd love to see a poll or something like that, but it seems like not even just a majority, but kind of an overwhelming amount of people want Airbnbs. On our community page, we had 59 people who wanted it to stay, and one person who's, you know, wasn't against it. So a large number of people really want this. A lot of people have, you know, started small businesses. I mean, my mom and I, we do student rentals, long-term rentals, and short-term rentals. And short-term rentals are the most fun because you get to actually make them really nice. And, I mean, we pick out all of our furniture, every fixture. We design everything ourselves. We've bought property in Arbor for the last 12 years and renovate them and rent them out to either students, families, or, you know, short-term rentals. I can tell you some other things. These properties are not sitting in the winter. They're generally occupied just at lower rates. I can say that long-term rentals don't have an enormous amount of support in this city to begin with. I've had a number of neighbors tell me that this is not a rental neighborhood. There's generally some resentment towards business. It doesn't really matter in what facet. So I think that, you know, as a student rental, long-term rental people, are you going to ban long-term rentals? Affordability, that's a pretty, I think it has, I don't know the impact that it has, but I don't think you guys do either. And I think that that's something we need to figure out. I can tell you what the problem is with affordability in Ann Arbor as being an investor is our cost of land and cost of construction. Our cost of construction is not going to change. Our cost of land can. If you guys work on the zoning code to allow for more affordable housing units to be developed, then this can happen, but it's not happening. And so I don't think that it would be helpful for you guys to strive to solve affordability by simply getting rid of short-term rentals. That seems like a cop-out. I have a cleaner that we employed just to, you know, do our turnovers, and now she gets to work for us every day. And, you know, she's able to now provide for her family. She came from another country, immigrated here, and we love working with her. Also, this is mostly local people doing this. This is not a corporate thing. People are not buying properties. We all know each other by name.
Thank you.
And there's no hotel lobbying. And so I think as a community, we should say that this is in the best interest. Thank you.
Thank you. Is there anyone else who'd like to speak at public comment? Seeing no one, public comment is closed. Are there communications today from council? Councilmember Hayner.
I promise I'll keep it under 3 minutes. I'm sitting here listening to these folks and listening to the whole meeting and our conversation we had, and I'm struck by one thing that was said, especially when it was kind of suggested that people who take advantage or use short-term rentals are not part of our community. And clearly that's been refuted by these speakers, and I appreciate you coming forward and speaking. And, you know, it's not very Christian of us to say something like that. And it's sort of a stranger danger situation. But the same, on the other face of that is every day we welcome 80,000 people into our community who we don't know and they don't pay taxes. We have 45,000 students who are, some move here and register to vote and become part of our community and some don't. Thousands of hotel rooms. And 5, 6 weekends, we have 100,000 people, 110,000 people who we don't know either, and half of them are drunk. So on one hand, we promote things like ADUs and growth and mixed use and density. And on the other hand, we complain about maybe there's a business in a neighborhood. Well, that's mixed use. Maybe there's somebody renting out part of their house. Well, that's an ADU. So those ADUs and growth and mixed use and density and those things, those aren't for current residents. Those are for future residents. That's planning for the future. Those are people we don't know. Those are strangers. So not only are we not being very Christian and welcoming, but we're being hypocritical about what we say. And I know I get a lot of grief out there on social media and in the community and even from some of my colleagues about the things that I say sometimes. And I know some of you can't wait to hand it off to the news, the letters that I write you. But if there's 2 things I'm going to work for here on City Council, it's clean water and an end to the hypocrisy that we have.
Councilmember Bannister.
And I just wanted to thank all these last 5 or 6 public commenters about short-term rentals. And I would run out and hand each of you my card, but I would instead, through this comment, encourage you all to keep in email citycouncil@a2gov.org as we go forward in this process, because it was a very difficult decision on this tonight's vote, and I think everyone here wants to get it right in the next few months. So your feedback and input, much like your public comments tonight, short emails, but are really helpful in us as we shape it, what the final vote will be in July.
Councilor Lum.
And I would also make an appeal to our long-term residents who live in their homes in these neighborhoods that are impacted by non-occupied short-term rentals. I attended one of the meetings, and in speaking to others who attended all of the meetings, apparently the meeting I attended was the dynamic was very typical in that at one point in the meeting, folks were asked to break out into groups, and invariably what we found, and I think this is reflective of for example, the e-comments that we received tonight, and I do think, frankly, a lot of that was precipitated by Airbnb sending out a mass email to its members and host community members, clientele, to come and speak tonight and to email City Council, which is, the free speech world, that's all well and good. But I do think at the same time that is, because that lobby is so strong, and this is a very lucrative business, that much like at the public meetings, where in these groups of, say, 10, you had one neighborhood representative, and the 9 people out of the 10 were Airbnb hosts. That the folks I've heard from are neighbors, are long-term residents, the people who live in their homes in the neighborhoods, who don't rent out their properties, who occupy their homes as their primary residence felt that their voices were drowned out. And I will continue to be an advocate for the vitality and quality of our neighborhoods. And so I would also encourage our residents who, may or may not be tuning in, but who have contacted us to stay engaged. It's very important that we hear from you, because I frankly think that you are what make our neighborhoods strong, and we are here to represent you primarily. I recognize this is a lucrative business, and but I do think that it's been pointed out at the break. Some people noted that there really aren't too many of these, so why is this necessary? That was one question that was posited to me. But I do think that, like other communities that are confronting this and that have instituted regulations, we are, we're coming at this because it was brought to our attention as a concern and something that we need to get ahead of. And so I do appreciate the work that's gone into this thus far, and look forward to our developing regulations that will help to strengthen our neighborhoods and represent the concerns of our residents.
Further communication from council? Councilmember Ackerman.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I want to make two clarifying statements with regards to my comments on Mr. Herskovitz's character. First, that I was speaking for myself and not the body, and second, that my statements were based on my interpretation of facts I've observed over a decade, and his comments at City Council tonight and in years prior. Other people can interpret those facts differently.
Further communication? I guess, I'd just like to observe that no one here, I think, at council denies the utility of short-term rentals for proprietors, the utility for people that avail themselves of short-term rentals, the short-term tenants. And I think people also recognize that there has been an investment made in homes, and that with a changing that a changing landscape could affect those investments. And that's something I think that we're all going to have to take very seriously as we move forward with any ordinance related to these rentals. I think it is also true, and it is not at all inconsistent, to observe that people move into a residential neighborhood with the expectation that they will be surrounded by residents. Persons who avail themselves of short-term rentals, that is to say, short-term tenants, are not residents. It is contrary to their expectation. I don't have a problem with people with shops in their houses. I don't have a problem with people with who teach music out of their homes. It's not a question of the commercial enterprise. The concern that I identified relates to like I said, the expectation that Ann Arbor residents will be surrounded in residential areas by other residents. I think that is what makes our community. I don't think further that that's at all inconsistent with the idea that we should have more residents, that more residents in a neighborhood is a good thing. That it's good to have ADUs to permit homeowners, property owners to rent their property to residents, to live on their land with them, to participate in the neighborhood, to go to school, to work in our community. I don't think that's all inconsistent with the proposition that we should expand density, that we should have more multifamily homes in Ann Arbor, to allow more people to be here, to allow persons of all economic and racial groups to be able to find a place in our community, which is, as we know, very difficult. I think that those are consistent positions, and I think that it is proper and righteous to welcome people here. Further discussion? Do we have a closed session today?
For the beginning of the new year, we do not have a closed session.
Mr. Postma, you are merciful. May I have a motion to adjourn, please? Moved by Councilmember Grant, seconded by Councilmember Lum. Discussion? All in favor? Opposed? We are adjourned.